special city council meeting. Today's Tuesday, the 6th of October, 2020. This meeting has been called in the time and manner required by the state of Texas code. Tonight, we are here to have a public hearing followed by consideration of the first reading of an ordinance from engineering. Item 1 is that public hearing. It comes from engineering. It's to conduct a public hearing regarding an ordinance for the imposition of impact fees pursuant to Chapter 395 of the Texas Local Government Code. Before we open that public hearing, I would like to give the staff, to give us an overview of this matter. Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Welcome. Glad you're here. Mr. Mike Keenum, our city engineer, is going to kick us off and I think turn it over to Kimberly Horn and walk through a presentation that really focuses more strongly not so much on what we've done to get to this point, but what the recommendations and those impacts might be going forward. So, Mr. Keenum, if you would.
Thank you, Jarrett. Mayor, Council.
Good evening, Mr. Keenum.
As I start, I want to thank the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, Thomas Payne, the chair, for just the work that they've put in. It's been an extraordinary amount of work, over a year's worth of effort and numerous meetings, and they've done an incredible job of spending time outside of those set meetings to do their own research and look at what other cities have done. And they've just spent numerous hours, and just kudos to them for all the work that they've done. It's been an incredible effort. And also to thank Jeff Whitaker with Kimberly Horn and Andrew with Fries and Nichols for the work that they've done. Been awesome working with those guys. They definitely know their stuff, and it's been a pleasure working with them. So some of these slides you guys have seen before. This shouldn't be a whole lot of new information, but for the public just to be aware of the impact fees. And this is a fairly simple infographic that we've had on our website now for some time. And basically you just kind of follow the path around. But you know, the top, you've got vacant land or you've got a new subdivision going in. Those get built. There's a one-time fee assessed to that. Those fees help offset the infrastructure costs. With those increased demands with the new development, we've got added vehicles on the roads, we've got new needs for water lines, for sewer lines, and so these new developments would pay a portion of fees that would be added to the already local funds, the taxes that we already collect and the fees that we already collect to help build that infrastructure. Today, 100% of infrastructure costs are funded by taxpayer dollars and fees. That's the only mechanism we have. This adds a tool to the toolbox if it's something that y'all choose to approve. And again, this is a one-time fee for new development. It does not affect existing homeowners. If you currently own a house and you're not planning to buy a new house, you don't get assessed this fee. This is for new homes, for new developments that fee gets charged to. It offsets those costs that we already have for infrastructure. It's for building new infrastructure. It's not for doing maintenance on existing infrastructure. It is highly regulated by Chapter 395 of the Texas Local Government Code. This has been on the books in the state of Texas since 1987. And so understanding that the process that we've had to follow is very well spelled out in the state laws. All of the processes, hiring the consultant, doing the study, conducting the public hearings, is all regulated and required by the state law of how we have conducted this. In Texas, water, sewer, roadway, and drainage are allowed. We're not considering drainage. We already have a stormwater fee, so that's not part of what's in the study. And also as a reminder that the overall project cost that we've showed you, 50% of that is already discounted, so not to double dip and account for ad valorem taxes that will come in as a result of that new development. Again, this is proportional to the impact that the new development has on the city and the city's infrastructure system. Only for new capital projects, not for maintenance again. And it's assessed at the time of platting. So when a plat comes in, we would assess, here's how much you would pay, but it's not paid at that time. It's only paid when a building permit is pulled for those properties. And again, this is another tool to accommodate new growth and new growth only. The service areas we've talked about for roadways, There's 8 for the city of Lubbock. State law requires a maximum trip length of 6 miles for a service area, and so these service areas were generated based on that requirement of the state law, no more than 6 miles of travel distance. And so this allows for potential future growth if we annex in the future, but we've identified 8 service areas for the city. Water and sewer would be citywide, a single service area for water and sewer. And again, these are the funds that are applied or collected within a service area can only be applied and used on projects within that service area. You can't take money out of one service area that was collected in, say, service area F and applied to service area C. That is illegal by state law. It has to be used within that service area. And it's for the projects that are on that approved list that's in the report that was approved back in June by this body. And as a reminder again, not for existing deficiencies, not for maintenance. That is for new projects, new capital to support the new growth. Those are kind of the basics in a nutshell. I'll turn it over to Mr. Whitaker with Kimley Horn to kind of talk through some of the more technical pieces and then the recommendations about the ordinance from the CIAC. Jeff?
Thanks, Mike. Good evening. Many of you have seen this map before. This is really the results of the study. If you recall, service areas are important in the impact fee study. Water and wastewater service areas are citywide, one service area, and roadway is divided into the service areas you see on the map in front of you. And this lists the dollar per vehicle mile for each service area, with service area F having the largest dollar vehicle per the mile, where the most infrastructure and growth is necessary, where service area G and H are the lower dollar vehicles per mile. If you recall, on the roadway side, there's roughly 65 land uses that are used to calculate the roadway impact fee, so it gets down to the actual use of traffic that's on the roadway system. So this is a snapshot of the formula that shows residential and office. It's basically the amount of trips generated multiplied by the trip length. So for a single family home, they generate 0.099 trips in the PM peak. They travel approximately 3 miles based on our study. So 0.99 times 3 is 2.97. This is just the formula that's used that you'll see further in the calculations as we show you what the maximum fee relates to in the CIAC recommended. So it's a 4-step process to determine the roadway impact fee calculation. The first step is determining what service area you're in. That helps understand where your fee is going to be because the service area has each individual fee units calculated with it. Then you need to understand your development units. What a development unit is the amount of square footage or how many dwelling units you have. So how many thousand square feet you have, or number of dwelling units, or for a place like a nursing home, it may be number of beds. And then each one of those are associated with vehicle miles per dwelling unit, development unit. That is what the chart I just showed you before. You would pull that number from that chart before. Then step 2 is determine the maximum accessible fee per service unit. And then you determine for the whole development what that maximum accessible fee is. And then you apply any discounts. You'll notice in the report, we don't mention discounts in the report because those are policy decisions. We stop at step 3 in the report. Step 4 can be in the ordinance. So here's an example to highlight just one example. This is a 10,000 square foot office building in service area A. So the service area is in its service area A, so you know that you're pulling the fee from service area A. It's a general office building. That's the development type. The development unit is 1,000 square feet. So there's 10 development units. You get that by 10,000 divided by 10, by 1,000 to give you 10. And from that spreadsheet I just showed you, it's 3.45 units per vehicle mile service units. If you looked at the first map I showed you that had how much it costs per dollar per service area, in service area A that was $878 per vehicle mile. So you take 10, which is the total number of development units, multiply that by the vehicle miles per service unit, multiply that by the maximum accessible fee. So 10 times 3.45 times 878 would be $30,291 for a 10,000 square foot office building in service area A. That's where the report stops. Like I mentioned before, our CIAC recommended a 50% reduction for non-residential and non-single family in the report. So 50% off of that would be $15,145. So that'd be step 4. Water's a little bit simpler. There's a table. It's based on the meter size you pull. So if you pull a 1-inch meter, you would pay what's in that table there. So you don't have to worry about land use. It's all based on meter usage and what meter size you pull. Everything's equated back to a 1-inch meter. That's the base meter, and Lubbock is a 1-inch meter. So you can kind of think of it as a ratio of the 1-inch meter. So a typical single-family home is a 1-inch meter. So in Lubbock, that would be $562 for wastewater and $576 for water. So just to equate that to the most common land uses, we took the 5 most common land uses that when building permits come in, they're typically single-family, multifamily, kind of basic industrial, basic office, or basic retail shopping center. So these are the most common land uses you see from building permits. So we equated that to what it would cost per development unit at the maximum impact fee rate. This is the study rates. So when you look at this, for example, you see the office that was discussed previously in service area A, it's $3,029 per service unit. In the previous example, you'd multiply that by 10 to get to the $30,000 we discussed. And when you look at water and wastewater, it shows those equivalently rates. The water and wastewater meters may change because it's based on meter size. So not every building has the same meter size, but we made some estimates on here of what typical buildings would have meter sizes. We took some examples we provided you before and used the actually calculated maximum fees. These are real developments that have happened within the city of Lubbock, and we put what service area they're in. Most of these are in service area E. Just to give you some examples, the top line is the single-family detached housing unit. These are the maximum calculated impact fees. So these aren't no discounts. These are with the maximum calculated impact fees. We use multifamily. You see HEB there twice, and you may ask, why is it there twice? Cities have different policies on how they calculate that. It's really a range between the store. So if you look at service area E, if this is at the maximum fee, a service area store is at $1.2 million. That is a discount. That's a large superstore. If it was a supermarket, it's higher, but most of the time the supermarket's only a portion of that. So a lot of times the HEB is more than just a supermarket. So in some cases they use just the store. Some cases they use a hybrid of the two. So they would take two different and add them together. So that's why it's a range. Every city kind of treats that category a little bit differently. We looked at apartments, a Chick-fil-A, garden office, and a retail strip center. And this just gives you a feel at the maximum fee of what these levels would be if the maximum fee was chosen. The technical report, this is kind of the transition slide. Everything I showed you before is really based on the report items, the maximum fees. That's what the report would say. If you would charge the maximum, that's what it would be out. Everything in the report we done is required by the local government code, and it's outlined in that process, as Mike mentioned. What we're about to show you is how this relates to what CIAC recommended, and we're going to show you the CIAC recommendations and some other recommendations. So to summarize the CIAC rate recommendations, they set the collection rate for roadway impact fees in service area G and service area H to 0. They set the collection rate for single family greater than 2,000 square feet at the maximum rate. Remember that service area G and H are 0, so with the exception of those two service areas. They set the collection rate for the single family residential less than or equal to 2,000 at a 25% discount. And then all other non-single family residential land uses were set at a discounted rate of 50%. Again, service area G and H being the exceptions, set to 0. And they recommended setting the collection rate for water and wastewater impact fees to 0. Other recommendations that CIAC made was to set the effective date of the ordinance to 6 months from adoptions. As you see in the draft ordinance, writing a draft ordinance saying 6 months from adoption is difficult. So we have drafted the draft ordinance to say June 1st, 2021. A little more than 6 months from today, but giving some time for what the potential adoption should be. Required any change. This is an important element that one of the common questions was, well, you could change the rate at any time you wanted, and CIAC was concerned that you didn't want to just change the ordinance to change the rate. So one of the items in the ordinance was to require any change in the collection rate to go through the public hearing process outlined in the Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 395, which that process requires to set a public hearing, hold a public hearing, and there's a 30-day advertisement period for that. They also wanted to have CIAC to have a minimum of 60 days to review any ordinance changes. So they wanted to make sure it went back to CIAC and had 60 days to review that ordinance change. And then any change would require a 6-month delay from adoption date. So there would be a process to get there and then a transition period once it happened there to make sure that something isn't just changed in 2 readings of the ordinance. So that was one of the recommendations that CIAC wanted to make sure that was included in the ordinance. CIAC and other ordinance recommendations. There was another recommendation for roadway impact fees that if it's an existing occupied buildings that's not being demolished, that's having a change of use, and the total square footage is not modified by less than 1,000 square feet, that it wouldn't be assessed an impact fee. And really what that was is for really focused on redevelopment and areas inside the loop, so that if it was a building that was being redeveloped, that they wouldn't have to pay an impact fee. And we wanted to make sure that was clear. And that was one of the recommendations to that, that the CIAC had. This was a recommendation. It wasn't brought up in CIAC, but it's been brought up before this committee. We have a item in the ordinance for affordable housing that qualifies for affordable housing to be exempt from impact fees, from roadway impact fee collection. So what we've developed as we're going through this process is ultimately the math I showed you would be hopefully the last time someone has to deal with that math. We developed a worksheet that you can drop down. This would be a worksheet similar to be online or that the City of Lubbock staff would have that could basically select the land uses. So you'll see the same developments that I showed you in your example slide before, that the max fee, the supermarket, the HEB, the multifamily, the fast food restaurant, and you can see what their maximum impact fees, which were shown before, with their potential collection rate from CIAC. You'll notice that for example, the freestanding stores, the HEB, that ranged between, in service area E, between $645,000 as a superstore, and if it was all supermarket, it would be $1.1 million. But most of that, it's a hybrid between the two. That's the range of what it would be. General office building under the recommendation that we showed would be $10,184. So what's highlighted in red is what the city would collect. What's shown to the right is just the maximum fee for your references. But this is based on the recommended CIAC rate. This is basically the same recommendations that you see on that worksheet before you. In that red box, it's just written a little bit bigger so people can see the numbers a little bit better and you can see the numbers a little bit better. What this does include that you didn't see on the other one is the discount rate that's applied. So for example, single family home shows a discount of 0% for the greater than 2,000 square feet single family home. The multifamily home, all the others are discounted at 50%. But it's the same elements that you saw previously. The one you saw previously was just for service area E. This shows all service areas. So this shows all service areas, while the previous calculation was just one service area. So we looked at revenue projections just to see what the revenue would be projected over the years. We looked at the maximum impact fee. That was roughly $15.3 million for roadway, $2 million for water, and $1.89 million for wastewater. Based on the CIAC recommendation and based on our growth projections, that was $9.3 million a year for roadway, and for water and wastewater, that was $0. We did look at building permits since 2019, and we were roughly in that range across the city, plus or minus 10% of that range on average on the year, if you actually looked at historically what's been pulling and what's been pulling building permits. So the revenue is close to what we projected the revenue to be based on actual permits that have been pulled since 2019. Looking at the previous building permits that have been pulled, service area E experienced the most growth over the last 2 years, so it generated the largest percent of that revenue. It was roughly 35% of that revenue if it was in existence in the previous years, because service area E had 1,401 single-family permits pulled in the last year and a half. Just to give some minor report updates. We've had the report online for over 30 days now for the public to review. There's no substantial changes. Really, most of these are getting it ready to finalize. If it was to be adopted, we would want to add an inside cover sheet so we have a place to actually, state law requires us to seal the report with our seal. We don't have a place to put a seal on it, so we needed to add an inside cover sheet. We would remove the draft watermark. The ordinance, with consultation with legal, we decided that the ordinance, since it could be updated, we didn't want to put it inside the report that may not be updated for 5 years, so it's going to be referenced in the report and be a standalone ordinance, so that document we removed. And then table 32, the only real change of the report is that we wanted to clarify a few of the descriptions, and so we did some further clarification on the land use descriptions. But those are just to let you know the updates that we're recommending to go associated with the report. Very minor in changes, nothing related to the technical side. So today is the public hearing. The actions for today is to review the CIAC comments, which I'm sure members of the CIAC will present their comments that we summarized for you today. Hold the public hearing on the imposition of impact fees, and to review the proposed ordinance, which summarizes a lot of the CIAC recommendations that you've seen before you. Some of the options you have today is to close or continue the public hearing. Any action on ordinance or provide comments or directions so we can go back and bring the ordinance back to you revised. One thing to remember is that much like the land use assumptions and the capital improvement plans that you approved, Ordinance must be approved or disapproved within 30 days of closing the public hearing. So that's just something to keep in mind, that's state law requirement. And this is just the service area map to remind folks of what those areas are in town. With that, that's the wrap up of the briefing for today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Council, before we open the public hearing, do you have any questions? Okay, I will now open the public hearing. I would like to, anyway, before we get started, please silence your phones. The council appreciates original thought, that's a nice way of saying we don't want to hear the same thing over and over. When you come forward, if you would please identify yourself, your name and your address, if we need that for the record, okay? And that being said, we'll open the public hearing.
Good.
You're good.
All right.
Good evening, Mr. Hernandez.
I'm Adam Hernandez, currently living in the 7400 block of Avenue X. I'm the Communications Committee Chair on the Board of Lubbock Compact. I'm also a member of the Initiating Committee on the Citizens Ordinance on Impact Fees. So we had a chance to meet with many of you over this past week, and I must say, those meetings gave me hope for the future of Lubbock. We all agree that there's a lot of potential here. There's so many possibilities. But between those possibilities and the reality of a healthy, steady growth across the entire city, there's certain things we can do following the guidelines of Plan Lubbock 2040. The question is, do we have the courage and the commitment to work together to do those things? So in the spirit of that, we'd like to extend an invitation to the CIAC committee, to the developer community, and City Council before we make our request for this evening. Let's all commit to working together on this impact fee issue and other issues to see where we can find some common ground while still allowing for and participating in healthy growth across the entire city for everybody. We believe that there are ways that we can do this together. We believe that at a time of such divisiveness across our country, we can be an example to others of how people with different ideas and interests can come together around common goals to get real results. So we're asking that the City Council not close the public hearing this evening so that more information can be reviewed and so that we can have a more collaborative discussion about this very important issue before we make a final decision. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Good evening, Ms. Lowry.
Good evening. My name is Natalie Ayers. I live on East Harvard. I'm Advocacy Committee Chair of the Board of Lubbock Compact, also a member of the Initiating Committee of the Citizens Ordinance of Impact Fees.
Ms. Ayers, will you pull that microphone
Sure.
a little closer to you, please, ma'am?
Can you
Just
hear
bend
me?
it down. There you go. Yeah.
Okay. He's a little taller than me.
That's right. And just really project into that thing.
Thank
Okay.
you. I want to thank you all in advance for listening to the hearts of citizens as we implore you to put people over profit. I'm not sure if this was the first time there was an extent with Mr. Wilker's presentation, but I think we have a very interesting decision that we need to make as far as who's really to benefit and who could possibly be the ones who would be harmed with the decisions that we could make. There is one thing that we all have in common. Is irrespective of our nationality, our sexual orientation, as well as our financial status. And that being that we know someone who has been affected by coronavirus, either physically or financially. The uncertainty of whether or not life will return to normal with people who have worked their whole lives for businesses, seeing their businesses being closed at this time, people who are uncertain of whether or not they're going to be able to feed their families. These citizens, they're having to deplete their savings. Some find themselves having to rely on outside assistance for the very first time. Others who were having issues prior to coronavirus are finding themselves even deeper in these situations. So with the insurgence of racial tensions, Our city just recently had been attacked by white supremacist groups hoping to intimidate our citizens. And I want to thank you, Mayor, for immediately denouncing that and saying that's not who we are, that's not what we stand for. So thank you very much for that. With the combustion of stressors, racial tensions, environmental issues with industries surrounding communities, with different financial stressors, we find ourselves here asking to not add to those stressors. We have no idea what the next day is going to come. From Mr. Wilker's presentation, it seems that those are guesstimations of folks that could come into the city. So we don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know what next week, next month, even next year, we don't know what it's going to bring. So while we're finding ourselves in some sort of particular position, currently many citizens were already in those positions prior to the pandemic, and we're having an already heavy load. And it's simply unthinkable for those folks to have to wonder, what's to come. I'm asking that the discussions be extended until Lubbock Compact can collect the required signatures to place the citizens' ordinance before City Council for a vote, or that the City Council request that the proposed ordinance by CIAC is changed to follow the recommendations of Plan Lubbock 2040. Thank you guys for your consideration, and again, I would hope that you will put people over profit.
Thank you, Ms. Ayers. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Council. As you all know, I'm also a member of the Lubbock Compact Governing Board and also a member of the initiating committee of the Citizens Petition. And I'm here to go on record as against the policy and ordinance recommendations of the CIAC committee currently before you. I'll spare you all a more lengthy recitation of why, as you've all already been more than gracious to have given abundant attention to my protestations in other forums. Put plainly, impact fees transferred the cost of infrastructural demand of new development to the front end of the transaction instead of ultimately passing off the entire thing to the taxpayers and ratepayers of the city in the forms of taxes and fees. Given that we have spent a great deal of money to calculate what they should rightly and fairly be, there really is no reason to discount them at all, except to achieve the goals and recommendations as outlined on page 191 of the already adopted Lubbock Plan 2040. Indeed, lest we forget it, an impact fee policy that adheres to the goals as described also on page 223 of Plan 2040, and the suggested methods there to achieve them are in fact aligned with the policy goals expressed by the people as evidenced by their conformance to the robust participation in and oversight of the CIAC committee's meetings by citizens and their eagerness to sign the ongoing citizens' ordinance petition. I therefore urge the council not to move on this matter until the completion of the signature gathering period for the ongoing ordinance petition, and instead focus their much needed attention on helping to create policy that both remedies the tail wagging the dog situation we have historically had regarding development in the city and is applied in such a way as to repair the negative, if in fairness mostly unintentional outcomes of historic policy choices or the lack thereof. I thank you for your time, as always, in this matter. Have a good evening.
Mr. Shankles, if you'd read your name and address into the record,
Oh,
please.
certainly.
Yes.
It's Joshua Shankles, and it's 260447.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. How are you? A city's soul is not judged by the condition, Jim Beck, 5632 Duke Street, and I'm just a Bible and missions professor. The city's soul is not judged by the condition of its richest and greatest. A city's soul is judged by the condition of its poor and least. In Katie Park's book, Remember When? A History of African Americans in Lubbock, she says, remarkably, businesses progressed and grew in East Lubbock at a steady pace. African Americans could not obtain loans to build or buy a business. Oftentimes, capital and merchandise were scarce, but businesses managed to triumph over the trials and overcome the obstacles. When the urban renewal came into East Lubbock in the 1960s, our lifetime, to redevelop and relocate African Americans, many businesses were closed and never reopened because the African Americans were only paid enough to relocate their homes and did not have the money or space to build their businesses again. I've heard it said several times in the CIAC committee meetings, which I have observed, we don't want to pick winners and losers. And as I and others have said or implied many times, we picked winners and losers in 1923. We picked winners and losers in the 1960s. And we, you, will soon pick winners and losers. Or you may be tempted to imagine you are just being fair across the board to everyone. However, being fair now only deepens the impact of the unfairness then and continues to perpetuate the unjust choosing of winners and losers. You, Mayor Pope, and the council can be the civic body that decides it is time to begin to turn the tide, change the trajectory, and right the wrongs of the past. To do the right thing, the righteous and just thing, not just the seemingly fair thing. As I've said before, this could be your legacy of grace and hope for all citizens of Lubbock, especially the poor and the least citizens of Lubbock. Let the rich carry their weight and begin to restore hope in East, North, and Old Lubbock. Search your souls. Search the soul of our city. Judge wisely. Choose wisely. Lead this city down a new, a better, a more just path, a better future for all. Go slow. Think deeply. Pray and listen. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck.
Good afternoon, Mr.
evening,
Mayor,
Counselor.
City Council. I'm Fernando Bustos, and my address is 1001 Main Street. I am proud to be a member of the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce on their board of directors, and we're grateful to be a part of that organization that helps to create prosperity and opportunity for employees and businesses around Lubbock. And although our organization may differ with the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee's recommendations on residential construction discount rates, we do agree that additional revenue streams are necessary for roadway projects so that Lubbock can accommodate additional growth. However, I would urge you to consider that water and wastewater infrastructure should not be funded in the same way. The city's water and wastewater enterprise funds are paid into Lubbock by all of its citizens and its business owners. We're charged a base rate and a usage rate that is designed to provide the city with enough money to maintain existing infrastructure and construct new infrastructure as needed. It is a citywide system with a specific funding mechanism that benefits all citizens equally, and that's what makes it fair and reasonable. However, adding an impact fee for water and wastewater would essentially be a double tax on future residents of new housing or commercial development. This new fee or tax is imposed on the builder initially, but as we all know, that extra cost will be passed on to the consumers. On a citywide system funded by an enterprise basis, why should some Lubbock homeowners and businesses have to pay into the system twice when most residents only pay into it once? It's fair to point out that the advisory committee is recommending the water and wastewater rates be set for zero so that this tax will not be enacted now, and that's a good thing. However, even if the council were to adopt that recommendation and these rates would be set at zero, we could be only 60 days and 2 readings of an ordinance away from double taxing some Lubbock residents on the wastewater and water fees. That would not be good policy. And the process of setting waste and water impact fees in the future deserves the same effort and energy as that expended by the advisory committee members who put forth more than a year of work into this process. To leave residents vulnerable to double taxation at the whim of a future city council would be unwise. And this is especially true given that these enterprise funds were set up to be sustainable. And it's my understanding that members of the Impact Fee Task Force that the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce is a part of have data that shows that enterprise funds should continue to be sustainable into the next 10 years. If this council or a future council wishes to explore setting water or wastewater impact fees greater than zero, then that decision should go through a similarly long, open, and deliberative process as the advisory committee did. Finally, I'd like to say a word about the impact fees on residential development. Setting a 25% discount only for homes 2,000 square feet or under seems a bit arbitrary, especially since in 2019, the average new home built in Lubbock was greater than 2,000 square feet. In order to be fair to all new homeowners, I would urge that the council would provide a 50% discount across the board to all homeowners. Mayor and council, thank you for this opportunity to visit with you. We appreciate all the work that you're doing in deliberating on this important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Bustos.
Mayor, City Council, I'm Craig Wells with Half State Bank. I'm a member of the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce, lived here a long time, and I reside at 7700 block of Lynn Haven. First, thank you for the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee and Chairman Thomas Payne for their service and dedication to this process. Although I'm going to express a slightly adjusted view from theirs on this issue here today, I salute them for their time, their effort, and their energy, and the fact that they were volunteer citizens putting in their time. Thank you very much to them. Watching our city and community grow has been a rewarding thing to see over the years. Growth means jobs, visitors, and property and sales tax revenues, and more opportunities for those who want to call Lubbock home. But we understand that with the growth we've seen, we also need to stay ahead of the curve by investing in our city's infrastructure. The discussion on impact fees must include how to successfully balance the need for additional infrastructure investment while not creating a home buying market that prices consumers out of the American dream. We want Lubbock to remain an attractive and affordable place for people to live and work. I personally think that we've been blessed for a long time to have the affordability and the quality of residences and apartments that we have in Lubbock. It's something we've, as citizens, have always been able to brag upon, and I feel rest assured we will continue to be able to do that. As someone here from Lubbock's banking community, I understand the financing processes of homes, and it's always inviting and encouraging to see a new home go to a family that realizes the dream of home ownership, especially for the first time. I understand the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly shaken things up, especially for those first-time home buyers now facing economic uncertainty. Although the CIAC has worked a 25% discount into the recommendations for residential construction below 2,000 square feet as a nod to affordable housing, I feel more can be done for the home buyers. First, square footage alone is not necessarily an indicator for affordable housing, and 2,000 square feet is a bit arbitrary. A 50% discount on impact fees across the board for residential construction would be much more fair and would assist all potential home buyers in their endeavor to make Lubbock home. It is, after all, home buyers who will be impacted by these residential construction fees. The fact of the matter is, the cost of doing business is passed along to the customer. As we have all seen in our own businesses or other businesses, that wholesale price is at one level, and then the consumer, if it raises, is the brunt of that raise in price. Some may think the impact fee cost is trivial to a monthly home mortgage, and this is also not true when the total cost is looked at. I think everybody understands that the total cost of a house, if it increases, the down payment, the monthly payment, those things that allow a homeowner to push that button to make that purchase that first time is something that is affected. A story published by Texas A&M Real Estate Center showed that every 1,000 increase in home prices estimates that 25,000 Texas households from the market eliminates roughly 25,000 Texas households from the market. In other words, the cost of a home goes from 100 to 101,000. That means 25,000 Texas households wouldn't be able to afford the increase. Go from 101 to 102, there's another 25,000 that would not be able to afford that price increase. That's statewide data and is not specific to Lubbock, but the fact of the matter is it's a relatively small increase in home prices do indeed price some families out of the market. Again, this issue requires balance. There is no doubt that additional revenue streams for the city of Lubbock to better accommodate growth and to pay for infrastructure is needed and welcome. I simply do not want to see that come at the expense of turning Lubbock into a place that is unaffordable or unattractive housing for families. Please consider offering a 50% discount for impact fees on all residential construction for the indefinite future while we continue to recover from the economic harm caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also state that the water and wastewater fees in opposition as has been previously stated. Thank you for considering my input, and thanks to all of you for what you are doing and what you will continue to do as council members and mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Becky, Jarrett, Chad. My name is George McMahon. I live at 7703 LaSalle here in Lubbock. I was a senior in high school in September of 1961 when the state passed the sales tax ordinance. And the rate back then was 2%, 2 cents on the dollar. The old man I worked for at the time, and turned out he was only about 40, but I was 16, so he seemed pretty old. He says, boy, by the time you're my age, they will have doubled or tripled that tax. And he's proved out to be correct. You know, it's 4 times what it was now. It's, you know, at 8 1/4 here in Lubbock. That's the problem. One of the problems I have with this ordinance is you do have some controls, but I can see that it could easily, those impact fees could easily be raised by going back to CIAC and raising them, and that bothers me. I don't know of a developer in Lubbock that's not willing to help with thoroughfare paving. We really believe that y'all need a revenue stream for that. It's proven that over time, the gain in property tax will eventually pay for those streets. If all that money could be kind of left in that subdivision and not put into the general fund where it gets spent in a lot of other places. So you really do have the revenue stream through the property tax rate on the increase in property. But we're still willing to help on that. I don't like the water and sewer charge though, because you've got a revenue stream for that. Y'all charge a water fee, stormwater fee, a sewer fee, and that should be enough to pay for any new water and sewer lines that y'all have to put in. And I think it's important to note, and y'all probably know this, but a lot of the general public may not. When we develop a piece of property, we as developers, we pay for every foot of pipe for water, for sewer. We pay for the streets. We pay for the street lights, the fire hydrants, the street signs. We even reimburse LP&L or SPEC for the biggest part of the installation of the electrical. That's part of developing. We recover that money when we sell our lots to the builders, and then the builders, of course, pass the cost of that lot along to the homeowner. And the press releases and the press has been reporting that this is a tax on development. And it's pretty easy to say, yeah, soak those rich developers, they got lots of money. Well, we don't, and that's not who's going to end up paying it. It's not going to be us as developers, and it's not going to be the builders. As Craig said, it's going to be a cost of doing business that gets passed along to the home buyer. And that every $1,000 increase prices some people out of the market. And I hadn't even thought about what he said about the down payment, but another $4,000 or $5,000 in an impact fee, that's another $1,000 or $1,500 down payment that people have to come up with. And that would keep some people from buying a house. What was I going to say here? And it also bothers me a little bit that the Lubbock Compact people keep saying that income or taxes from downtown Lubbock and East Lubbock are subsidizing development in West Lubbock, Southwest Lubbock. That is absolutely not true. I sent all of y'all figures a couple weeks ago that show that the newer subdivisions pay a huge amount of property tax that gets put into the general fund that actually provides the improvements for the rest of Lubbock, for central Lubbock and north and east Lubbock. I would ask that, Matt, if you're here tonight, that you would report this correctly, that old Lubbock is not subsidizing Southwest Lubbock development, and that this is not a tax on developers. It's purely a tax on home buyers. The system that we used to have, I would say this too, if y'all are going to collect these fees, and I think you should do the impact fee for thoroughfare paving, I do, at the 50% discount. If you're going to collect those, please use that money to build the streets with. Don't wait 10 years and not get these streets built that we need. I can remember Frankfurt Avenue is a perfect example of a street that didn't get built. You know, we had the adjacent paving ordinance back then. And from Spur 327 to 98th Street, that land was fully developed. Those developers all along there paid adjacent paving fees. As each time they platted a tract, they paid the adjacent paving fee. The city did not put that money in a lockbox like we would have or you would expect to. They went and put it in the general fund, and it got spent by previous councils. Randy Nagelbauer was on the council at the time. People in his district came to him and said, hey, we need Frankfurt Avenue paved. He did the investigation, found out the city had spent the money. He went and got some state grants and got Frankfurt done out through 98th Street. And that's a major thoroughfare, a lot of good development along there, some good businesses. So if you're going to collect this tax, be sure that somebody is overseeing it and make sure that those roads that we need get built. And that's pretty much all I've got to say. Thank you all for your service. I appreciate it. I know the last few months have been tough on everybody with all the stuff that's going on, so we do appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Appreciate you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm John Zwiker. I reside at 4615 101st. I'm not here as a former member and chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, which I see is here, nor am I here specifically as the current chairman of the Oversight Committee for the Plan 2040, nor am I here as a former chairman of the great committee that started the 2040 and is continuing to go on. Little history. I did not know a lot of the developers or builders before this started. I did some business with them, but I got to know them pretty well when this process was over. Some of them a little more better than others, as a matter of fact. But I, as a group, respect everything they've done. But this issue is about fairness. One word, fairness. I disagree. Now, real quick, the funds that go in here, a little history on it, it's my understanding, is highly regulated. It will go for streets. You don't have a choice. And yeah, I think I have 10 years to spend it. If you don't, it goes back to the people. So there's a little homework that needs to be done on this. It's I think, a good way to go about this. But I'm here to talk about water and sewer. I disagree with a number of people on this. Number one, I think it's appalling that we'd set up a fund with 0%. Okay? I think that if you go through this, and the people, which I disagree with some of the others, the people that live east of I-27, that live in the Northeast, that live in Arnett, Benson, and Central Lubbock, as opposed to the districts that Randy has, Jeff has, and Steve has. For many, many years, and by the way, we had a business from the 29 till 1989 downtown there, and currently out on the spur, and the business is Scoggin Dickey. But, you know, I think we're missing something here. Many of these people have been here for many years, and I disagree. They have paid for that growth in the rates that we're paying for utilities and all the fees. Goodness gracious, we hadn't had rain in 6 months, but we're still paying stormwater fees, and I understand it's going to rain again one day. But we're paying for that stuff. Okay, so there's some inequities in these fees in the way, in fact, the rates on our utilities. We have people that have been here a long time, and our business has paid dues to the Chamber of Commerce for 91 years. If you were in business 91 years ago, I don't know, Eddie, if you were. So we understand that we have to do our fair share, but to put it on the backs of people that have fixed income or on Social Security or live in other parts of town that aren't growing is unfair. These fees could have, in fact, all this is about defraying cost. If you have an impact fee for water and sewer, which one day you're going to need it, you might as well put it in now. God forbid if you took some of this and refunded it back to the ratepayers that have been paying this for 60 and 70 years and have owned these homes for this. That's what this is about. It's about fairness. You know, and I think if you look on page 225 of our 2040 plan, the number one bullet point, by the way, real quick, some of y'all up there met with me before our committee started and said, quote, I have my notes, this is not going to be business as usual in the city of Lubbock. We will have impact fees. So I got that charge and we went with it. Development of a well-thought-out impact fee program for the funding roadway projects. Consideration should be given to include water and wastewater impact fees to program. And of course, it says form the CIAC committee, which you don't have a choice. You have to do that if you're going to do these things. I think the developers and the homeowners, home builders have done frankly, I think they've come around quite a bit. I remember the first meeting I went with them, one of them had told me, and I had to quote in my notes, okay, if I can say that to y'all, which is not, I think, indicative of their attitude right now. Okay? They said, owners and business owners have paid for all the growth until now, and they're just going to have to continue doing that. And I think it's a credit to the group over there that they came around, okay, and they saw it. And frankly, I'm excited that they have, because it wasn't starting that way from that standpoint. So I think it's to the point now if I can say something to all of y'all up there, it's about leadership from y'all. It's about time y'all stood up and said, we need to think ahead and have some fees for water and sewer, and possibly defray the cost that the rest of us are continue to pay for many, many years. Thank y'all.
Thank you, John. Jordan?
Council, thank you. Jordan Wheatley, 3913 114th Street. George took half my notes here, so that's, thanks, George. I just echo George's comments. I do have just something a little bit different. I just want to show a graphic. I had it here. Yeah, here it is. I know how y'all know how we feel and where we stand on impact fees. Ton of interviews, ton of TV interviews, all that. So I just thought I'd come with a little bit different perspective here. What you have in front of you is a graphic map of District 6. This is just something that our company, 806 Land Group, is working on currently. This is my own company. Contrary to popular belief, not all development is in South and Southwest Lubbock. In 2017, we started thinking differently about Lubbock and started looking towards the north, primarily because it was all there, and it had been there for many years. State highways, water, and sewer infrastructure have been in place for many years. And so what you see outlined are just some red areas that, just looking at Google Earth one day in 2017, I just looked at that and thought, those are infill type projects that I'm gonna go up there and drive around and check it out. Just want to briefly run down what you see here on the north side, north of Erskine, Uptown West, 253 lots. Lincoln 16, 318 lots. To the west, north of 19th Street, still in District 6, Burgundy Park, over 700 lots coming online in the next 10 years. Terra Vista, just west of Terra Vista Middle School, will be 400 lots. We chose these developments because they were there and they were ready. And we saw a potential demand. We saw that this area was slightly asleep at the time, but it is slowly becoming awakened with the rise of Bushland Springs that was to the south of Burgundy Park. Whenever that started going in, I told a couple guys, well, I said, oh, that'll never work, never ever. And I was wrong. And so that is what turned my head towards the north. But I just want, my point here is since all this was here and state highways were here, water and sewer was here, the city is going to win big time on these developments. 1,700 lots times a $250,000 average price range of a house, north of $400 million of residential tax value. That's just residential. That's not counting commercial at all. Commercial is going to be where the big play is. You can see on the calculations that you drop an HEB on the corner, $1 million. Houses, it's not going to quite amount to all that, but commercial is where the big play is. I do want to echo everyone's comments about just being cautious with this. Interest rates right now are what is propping up this market, period. Hands down. That's the rush right now. Sub 4% on a mortgage is what's fueling it. If you were to see this market shift and go north 7%, you're going to see a big slowdown. It's what's propping things up. So just be very cautious adding fees. This year alone, 2020, Price of lumber has doubled in price. No joke. I mean, we have the data here, and doubled. That's unprecedented. That's never happened. We're still reeling and trying to figure out what we can cut to make that work and still get a house to appraise. Yes, you look around Lubbock, it is booming, yes. But I just urge you to be very cautious. I think something's around the corner. I really do. This is being propped up by a low interest rate. I'll echo everyone else's comments on the impact fee task force about a 50% discount across the board regardless of what construction you're doing. I think that's a fair way to look at it. 50% discount on roadway only. Water and sewer, I've already spoke to that, saying that the enterprise fund works. We know it works. It's budgeted to work in the next 10 years. And these are examples like this in District 6, where you're going to see more and more come online with very little outlay by the city. There's going to be very, very little water and sewer outlay. It's already there. Huge sewer lines, water lines, it's all there. Very little outlay by the city of Lubbock. So that's going to be a big win for the city of Lubbock. Lastly, I wanted to see the 50% discount specifically for houses across the board. I just don't like the message of maximum towards single-family buyers. When you have a choice right now, I just don't like the word maximum assessment when you have a choice. Homes are targeted, single-family buyers are targeted. So let's be fair in all sectors of construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheatley. Thanks for your work, comments tonight, and your work on this effort throughout the process. All right, next comment. Good evening, Ms. Ward.
Hello, Michael Ward. I live over in northwest Lubbock, and I have for about the last 40-some-odd years, so, or 50 maybe. But anyway, it's a good place. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background as well. You know, I have to always come with a history lesson. This one's fairly recent history. But I went to a lot of the CIAC 2040 meetings, and of course we had the outside consultants, as we do on everything, coming in and recommending pretty expensive future street layouts, bike lanes, pedestrian walkways, green spaces, all of this as well. But the chair of the infrastructure subcommittee that was looking at how to fund these projects, a lot of these things are usually dreamed up with no price tag attached. It's like just dream big dreams and play like you can pay for it with magic money somewhere. But when he saw the debt service schedule of how long, how much basically they were going to need to fund these new projects and all, and he saw how much debt that we already have in a lot of departments, and that they don't pay out in a lot of cases until about 2038. And I appreciate the city manager working hard to get some of the debt a little bit more down than we have had before. But he came back and made the recommendation, says we've got to, as builders and developers, recommend these impact fees. And I thought that was a really good way of offsetting some of the cost of the new development in the areas. And it also has an effect probably of slowing down a little bit of the rapid southwest expansion and keeps from hollowing out older parts of Lubbock. I live in one that was built about 1960-ish and so forth, so I understood that effect as well. But the other part of this, of course, is and the utilities have already been brought up, but we have Of course, my pet peeve is all the excessive franchise and pilot taxes that are incorporated into our utility bills already, and pays for about, a little less than 20% of the general fund budget, quite frankly. And we're basically paying franchise fees on our debt service on all of these departments as well, which is just a continuing increase all the time, including, of course, stormwater, which is another whole subject. But anyway, the other concern that I have in looking at this, and I think it's all still a good idea, but the other concern that I have is that it will create an additional new fund, and I'm wanting to be sure that we're not overlapping the gateway funds that have been kind of designated for this for quite a few years now. I think about 2004 or 5 in there. And I pulled up the Gateway Streets overview for this next year, and what we've completed, and a lot of the focus of those has been Upland from 66th out to 82nd and beyond, 114th Street and all of that. And that's sort of the projects for this year. And Indiana from 130th to 146th. So it's also in an area that I think we need to consider and be sure that we're not overlapping that. Basically, those gateway funds, the Gateway Street funds, unlike Gateway that are into everywhere else, but those are all also paid for us as a pass-through from Xcel Energy, Suddenlink, Telecom, Gas, South Plains Electric. LP&L pays the largest amount, basically $4.5 million or so, from the electric part, because it's part of basically the 6%, two or so of that is going to Gateway. But all of these are really already paid by all of us all the time. And this year, it's almost $9 million worth that we're paying on the debt. And while it may be paying down, it still is showing another one of those that, unless we have done it in the last year, my last numbers on it, it was still out to 37, 38. And so I think we need to consider that, because Gateway was basically done to begin with for Milwaukee, and pretty much allowed the developers to bypass paying what would have been their pro rata share of all the infrastructure to put that in. And of course, it's been an amazing growth because of it, but we don't need to have two funds doing the same kinds of things, in my opinion. So I hope that we'll at least factor that into this when you're looking at it. I don't disagree with a lot of things that have been said about the older parts of town, and we have paid all of our lives on a lot of these things, but I still think that it's a good idea, as long as we're very careful with it, not to just create another fund over here that we can do things out of without public input and approval. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Ward.
Mr. Mayor, Council, good evening.
Mr. Payne, good evening.
Hope you're all well and in a good place tonight. I've stated before I would not stand up to speak without first thanking our police and fire department and all of the other associated departments that serve us in the city. I want to do that again for starters. I also want to thank the city council. Y'all do a great job. You don't get enough thanks for the job that you do and the time that you spend. I also want to thank city staff as a whole, and Mr. Keenum in particular, He's been on a warm seat from the time this process began. I suspect it may still be warm, but he's done an excellent job and a level-headed job in working with the CIAC committee and everyone else through this process. I also want to thank our consultants who have done a great job assisting the CIAC committee and also in advising the council and the CIAC committee and giving us much needed information. I especially want to stop, I'll save this for tonight intentionally, but I especially want to stop and thank the members of the CIAC committee. I want to call them out by name. Some are here. If you want to stand when I call your name, please do. Katie Salter, Jonathan Hill, Larry Bradley, Shane Sawyer, Irene Cantu Franks, and Andy Bean. This committee has conducted many meetings and with exemplary attendance and a commitment to the process we were charged to undertake that has been deemed by the consultants an effort they have not seen before in any other city. I'm proud to be part of that committee. The committee does not belong to the members. It belongs to the city of Lubbock. It will continue to serve long beyond the involvement of any of the current members, and will serve an important part in the ongoing process of the collection and expenditure of impact fees in the future. With that said, I brought 2 or 3 quotes to you tonight. I have a couple of short comments. I'll be happy then to answer any questions you want to ask. I'm not going to retread ground we've already been over. We went through at the City Council work session the final report that's in front of you, and the details of it and recommendations that were made. I'll be happy to answer any questions if anyone wants to ask any in a minute. One of my quotes I brought to you, which I think is relevant, is from a 9th century Viking who said, "Don't waste your time looking back. You're not going that way."
Which 9th century Viking was that?
Ragnar Lothbrok.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we had that on the record.
I
Thank
assumed you
All right.
knew
Yeah.
without me having to tell you. I apologize.
When you get past Leif Erikson, you lose me on a lot of those Vikings. So, okay, thank you. Thank you for
Please
that.
don't make me say that name
Okay,
again.
that's very good, actually.
I also have a quote from Winston Churchill, who's one of my favorites, who said, "There is only one duty, only one safe course, and that is to try to be right and not to fear to do or say what you believe to be right." I promise I only have 2 more. From Theodore Roosevelt, and I think this is especially important. "In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing." And lastly, from Aristotle, "There is only one way to avoid criticism. Do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing." We're fortunate to have a council that has a mission. Our mayor has stated an intention for us to develop wisely in Lubbock. I believe I quoted that correctly. And I wholeheartedly support that position. There are a couple of things I want to talk about real quick. We did not discuss at the work session, and it is not in the final report. It was discussed at the level of our our CIAC committee, though, and that has to do with the recommendation we've made in regard to a discount pertaining to the size of a home. If the council decides to go in that direction, I think with any ordinance, there needs to be some mechanism for enforcement and some penalty for violations. There was a lot of discussion about how the determination would be made. And the point I made at the time, the point I want to make tonight, is this is a City of Lubbock building permit. It has a box on it that specifically says total living area for reporting and permitting purpose. There's only one box that staff has to look at, that anyone has to look at to determine what the size of a house is in regard to what is permitted. And that ties into the second comment I want to make, which is that I heard someone on the council on a radio show after the work session was talking about the idea of maybe doing a discount based on the price of a home. And I just want to encourage y'all to be careful with that. That is many, many, many times more difficult to enforce. I've discussed this with the staff, particularly Mr. Keenum. There's not a mechanism for determining that is nearly so dependable as the mechanism for the size of a home. That concept was discussed by the CIAC committee, and afterwards we ended up basing that on the size of a home. I have a couple of parting comments, but I want to stop and offer to answer any questions if anyone has any.
We're gonna just let this be one way for now, Mr. Payne. We reserve the right to bring you back later, but we'll just continue to hear your comments since we're in public hearing.
I'll wrap up quickly. I said at the work session, and I want to say again, there is only one Lubbock, Texas. I reject the notion of putting labels on different parts of Lubbock, whether it's a label of direction or any other reason. We are all in the same boat, whether we like it or not, and it's a mistake for any of us to behave as though we are not, because we don't have a choice in that. With that said, I'll just say, every day is a great day in Lubbock, Texas. God bless Lubbock, Texas, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Payne, thank you very much. I think it's appropriate on behalf of the council to thank Mr. Payne, Ms. Cantu Franks, Mr. Bradley, Mr. Bean. I think those are the only ones that are here. Certainly the other members of that group, they were remarkably active and persistent in what they did, and we appreciate your efforts. Thank you. Good evening, Ms.
Hi.
Madison. How are you?
Good. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. I'm Dana Madison. I'm owner of Family Businesses, Advanced Care Management, and CPCS here in Lubbock, Texas. I reside at 5000 block of 117th Street, and I'm also a member of the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce Executive Committee. I'm here to speak in support of the position on this issue that the Lubbock Chamber, West Texas Home Builders Association, Lubbock Association of Realtors, and Lubbock Apartment Association are jointly advocating. The Lubbock Chamber of Commerce and Executive Committee have discussed this issue for several months at length, and I'm happy to be here speaking on their behalf. But I'm also here to speak as a delighted mother of 3 sons who have all returned with their families to live in Lubbock, a father-in-law who has also moved here, and now the mother of one of my daughter-in-laws is also moving to Lubbock. In no small part, due to the low cost of living here compared to other cities where fees and taxes have increased and resulted in higher costs to consumers. I believe the approach taken by the task force, representing roughly 4,000 businesses, affords better protections for consumers by balancing a 50% discount off maximum impact fees for all new residential construction, irregardless of size. This gives additional relief to all buyers of new home construction, and that's especially important in the times that we are currently in. This is especially important given that the commercial construction will also have impact fees imposed. While we are happy that those fees are set for a 50% discount, which we agree, any kind of additional cost for commercial construction will ultimately be passed on to the consumer. I'd also like to mention that I'm uneasy with the idea of including water and wastewater fees, but setting them to zero, especially if it would be easy for future city councils to set these at the maximum rate without going through a thorough process that you've already gone through to this point. Lubbock is very blessed, and we've been blessed in the past with thoughtful leadership at the city council level, but as 2020 has taught us too well, anything can happen. There's a way to balance things whether new development is not punished or discouraged. I've always believed that economic growth is not a zero-sum game. In fact, Lubbock's case, success breeds success. Increased residential or commercial development, no matter where it occurs in Lubbock, creates jobs and fosters small business growth. And increased amenities, which attract visitors who shop, eat, and spend money here, contributing to sales taxes while new construction generates property tax revenue. I would be remiss if I did not thank the regular citizens who participated on the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. I know this kind of thing takes time from their family and personal life, and we appreciate all the efforts. Thanks to all of you who lead our great city for your service, and thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Madison.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
Got you.
My name is Drew Gray, and my address is 6502 Slide Road. I'm the current president of the Lubbock Apartment Association, which represents over 26,000 rental units here on the South Plains. We greatly appreciate the time and effort, as others have mentioned, that the CIAC committee has put in on this arduous issue. I also don't envy the position you're in tonight. You're trying to balance budgetary needs while also promoting growth and prosperity for Lubbock businesses here in your community. Our top priority is to try to preserve and promote high-quality, affordable rental housing here on the South Plains. Keeping this housing affordable is critical to the future development and success of Lubbock, Texas. Impact fees, along with any other fees incurred in developing or operating a business, as others have mentioned, ultimately get passed along to the end user. As we've seen in other cities across the state of Texas, if they've adopted impact fees, their cost of living is not as good as Lubbock. The LAA understands and agrees we need to find a way to come up with a new funding mechanism for roads. And we agree that we are in favor with the 50% discount that has been proposed currently for multifamily. However, the LAA is opposed to any water and wastewater impact fees entirely. The CIAC committee has put in a lot of time and effort on this. The study that Kinley Horn put together took a lot of time and effort as well. I feel that the CIAC committee, along with that study, decided to make the rate zero for water and wastewater. That tells me the study did its job. It was commissioned and it served its purpose. Therefore, if we set water and wastewater at zero, it could be only 6 months before we just inadvertently propose that we increase it. As a developer, it's very hard to make good business decisions with only 6 months heads up. When we're planning these projects, we take into account years and years of projections, and we're putting a lot at risk with large capital outlays while we do these. Therefore, 6 months is not fair to change the game as we're in the middle of a project or planning for a project. Additionally, I'd like to remind the council that a new construction 250-unit apartment project, on average, brings in well over $200,000 of tax revenue annually. This tax revenue is in perpetuity and not a one-time fee. This tax revenue also gets to go to a lot of different uses, not just what we're talking about tonight, a lot of good uses. I also feel impact fees are not designed nor intended to be a carrot nor a stick for or against development. They are not intended to be used to incentivize development or discourage development in certain areas of the city. Development has and always will follow its natural course. Development is driven by growth and demographics, not city-imposed fees or taxes. City-imposed taxes only raise the cost of development and therefore overall cost of living. I strongly encourage you to adopt the roadway impact fee as proposed for multifamily with the 50% discount, and to not adopt impact fees for water and wastewater. To commission a study again is a good use of funds, regardless if it's 2 years from now, 3 years, 5 years. You're going to have to do it again in 5 years anyways. Therefore, I think that the study will serve its purpose again at that time. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Someone left a mask up here. Good evening, council. My name is Mont McClendon. I live at 4602 16th Street. I've kind of stayed out of the CIAC committee's workings. I think I can be accused by the various constituencies of the development community of being maybe aligned with one of the other areas of the development community, because my company, has been involved in laying out lots, has been involved in building houses, it's been involved in real estate, commercial real estate, retail, apartments, and all of those things. So I wanted to come in and talk a little bit about my understanding of the state of play regarding impact fees. Like Mr. Zwicker, I had an opportunity to serve on the CPAC committee, and I want to congratulate the city in communicating the known problem of roadway improvements in the city. I think beginning back in the CPAC process, staff and the consultants have done a good job talking about how, as we continue to grow, we are creating this lack of funding for needed roadway improvements relative to that growth. They have communicated that consistently. They've communicated that over and over again. And I will say that I think impact fees, personally, I think impact fees are a reasonable solution to that well-known problem. I like the fact that roadway impact fees identify the projects on which we will be focusing over the near term. I like the fact that roadway impact fees bring the city into that process in a meaningful way in purposes of funding. In fact, I think in certain instances, they bring the city in farther than might be otherwise accomplished by a 380 developer agreement. So I think the city has done a good job, and I think the CIAC committee, like so many others, have worked really hard to develop a solution that addresses that problem in a good way for the city. Because the catchments for roadways are geographically bound. You have a natural, and I don't think this was the purpose of the way that they did it, but you have a natural way in which parts of the city that are developed more already, historically, are paying a lower fee than parts of the city that aren't. And that makes sense to me. By contrast, I don't think the city has communicated, or the consultants have communicated, as well about why we need impact fees for wastewater and sewer. I think it's always nice to stand up after Fernando Bustos because he lays a good predicate. But I want to say that it is the understanding, it is the perception of the development community, as I understand it, that the enterprise funds created by our water and sewer rates fully pay for the developments that are needed in the near term and those that are identified in the capacity plans. So for all the reasons that I understand this being a good idea for roadway, I'm left at a loss when we talk about water and sewer because we have a system that works. Impact fees in regards to roadway is solving a known problem. Impact fees for something that's already fully funded is a solution looking for a problem. And I think that strikes me as too clever by half. You have a recommendation by the CIAC committee that any rate change flow through the CIAC committee first. And it would be my hope that you would consider at least strengthening that recommendation, that if you adopt an impact fee and set the rate at 0 for water and sewer, that you additionally commit that you not send a rate increase for water and sewer to the CIAC committee until you have completed a rate hearing for the enterprise fees, enterprise funds. That we know we have a hearing, we know and understand that there will be a deficiency in the enterprise fund, that the system is no longer working, and now we've identified a problem. I think that is a reasonable solution. I think that is a reasonable predicate to the concerns that have been raised by the others in the development community here tonight, which is we're not going to sneak our way into impact fees for water and sewer by setting the rate. And I can talk more about why I think that makes sense. Once you implement roadway impact fees, once you learn how to do them, once we build that capacity at the city level, and once we see how the different rates in different parts might affect what is needed in the water and sewer capacity plans, we may completely find that what we've assumed about the way the growth in the city is going to be is no longer the case, because you have created different catchment zones in roadway. So that's my 2 cents, my personal 2 cents on the issue. Like everyone else, I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this. I know that the CIAC committee has proven time and time again that no good deed goes unpunished. So I appreciate that, and that's my feelings on the matter. I almost took that mask.
Thank you, Mr. McClendon. All right, anyone else?
Mayor Pope, City Council, good evening.
Good evening, Nick.
My name is Nicholas Bergfeld. I live at 5413 76th Street, and I am a policy advisor for the Lubbock Compact Group. Today, I really want to talk about love and justice. I want to talk about love for One Lubbock, the love that we all have for this city, and I want to talk about how by doing right and adopting smart growth policies will result in justice. Before that, though, I just want to talk on a couple points that I've heard tonight. The first is an idea in economics that we could go to any professor at Texas Tech University and ask them this question: who pays a tax? Who pays a tax? It's a quantifiable question, something that you can mathematically determine by looking at supply and demand. And what you find is that the elasticity of demand determines who will pay a tax. The willingness of the market, right? The demand of the market determines whether or not the tax is passed on to the consumer or whether it is kept at a higher level. This is a well-characterized aspect of economic policy. And so when you're in a housing market and you ask the question, could somebody who is on the market for a $120,000 home, would they suddenly, because of impact fees, be able to afford a $140,000 home? Right? Would they buy a $140,000 home? Well, that's the thing. It's the market that determines the price. If they could have afforded a $140,000 home, they would have bought a $140,000 home, or the home builder would have charged $140,000 instead of $120,000, because that's how the market works. When it comes to taxes, how you determine who pays depends upon the demand, it depends upon the market. Now, when we're talking about a housing market, the issue that we have in Lubbock is the housing mix. You might have heard of a concept called the missing middle. What this is, it's a style of design, mixed use, mixed income developments that younger generations crave. And even older generations who are now empty nesters desire smaller square footage homes, single stories, but want connectedness and community also want. The challenge that we have in Lubbock today is that we have way too many single-family homes. The rental population that lives in those single-family homes in Old Lubbock, inside the loop, 50th Street is the dividing line. Above 50th Street, the majority of those neighborhoods, 50% of those populations are renters, right? In most communities, they are not living in homes. They don't want to live in homes. But what happens, and this is not unique in Lubbock, this is a national phenomenon. What we know is that single-family residential subdivisions have a lifespan, possibly 2 generations, maybe 3 at maximum. We are experiencing that effect inside of Lubbock, inside the Loop today. The neighborhoods that we are currently building in the South and the Southwest, we will also experience that in the future. There is a concept of unfunded liabilities that I believe that all of you are familiar with. That is what roadway costs in the future are. They don't show up on our budget, right, except for maintenance or if we're allocating some amount out of the general fund. You're either doing enterprise or some type of debt raise to fix these. You're not seeing it on the day-to-day. And so if any of the property developers sent you an analysis of the collection of annual property value from their subdivisions or the area to say that they pay their own way, that is incorrect. There is a national consensus that single-family home subdivision developments cannot carry their own weight, that the cost of infrastructure in the modern era, specifically roadways, is too high. Strong Towns, which is a very well-regarded new urbanism-based development group, estimates that a typical home inside of a single-family home subdivision, in order to generate the property tax values necessary for roadway maintenance in perpetuity, right? Impact fees are just for 10 years worth of capital improvements. We can't think about that in perpetuity. The average cost of that home has to be $650,000. And so when we're thinking about impact fees, we're thinking about $15 million a year. And because of the calculation that was done, what we can determine, because they looked at last year what these rates would be if that was the maximum fee calculation that they saw, and 35% of those were coming from Section E, which is the South, right? That means $5 million last year went from Lubbock citizens in the general fund and essentially paid for the capital improvements projects because we don't have impact fees. If we had had impact fees, those $5 million would not have gone there. Now here's the other part, right? The cost of infrastructure is the same regardless of who pays. Impact fees are not a tax. They are a shift back to the private sector, the appropriate costs that it takes to connect their neighborhoods to the city of Lubbock or to any community, right? When we're thinking about impact fees, this is a very, very minuscule sum, right? Section 395, Chapter 395 of the Local Government Code only allows you for an assessment of 50% maximum, 50% of the cost, right? There is a discount to the total estimated cost that you can charge the developer upfront because there's an assumption that in other ways you'll be able to recoup those values in different means. So even right out the gate, 50% of the cost when we're assessing impact fees, if they're at the maximum amount, you still cannot charge the developer for the cost of connectivity, right? So no matter what, our baseline is 50% maximum. And then when you go beyond that, when you look at the totality of this, understand that a 10-year projection of capital improvements does not appropriately capture the lifespan of roadway repair, right? Typically, we don't repair roads within a 10-year period. We go longer than that. We've had that problem inside of the loop. When y'all saw last year at the infrastructure or at the infrastructure presentation, the working session where the considerations for a bond were occurring, and you saw the pavement condition rating index for the neighborhoods inside of the loop, and you saw the amount of red that is on there, and it's been that way for a long time, right? The reality is that we can't afford the unfunded road liabilities that we have today. So why do we keep building a subdivision style that there is a national consensus that communities need to move away from that? Why do we continue to build in that style? And it's no one's fault. It's because of the organization of land use policy and the ways in which that our city over time has incentivized development. Much of this has been to our benefit as a community. There was a different era when the cost of road repair and maintenance was much cheaper. There was a different time. But even then, we still gave some preferences to our developer community, even within that context. It's the reason why, for many of us in Lubbock, we will always live with dirt alleyways, which many communities our size no longer have. That would have been a cost that developers would have needed to pay. Now, when we think about this, there are many areas of Lubbock, as one individual presented, where roads or new developments can be built. I'm excited about seeing developments in North Lubbock, right? Now, how are those things determined? It's not the market. How exactly houses are built, where they are built, is based on your Unified Development Code, which we do not have, so we're based on zoning and ordinances. It is based on land use policy. It is based on property taxes. It is based on, there are so many factors that a municipality has at play to regulate the ways in which that his land is utilized. Many communities now look at this and say, well, actually, this is the tool that we need for the 21st century. Because to move to smart growth means that we have to look parcel by parcel at how do we maximize property value for that parcel. How do we do that? And how do we go to the communities, the areas that we already have, and how do we improve them based on that concept? This is about infill, it's about redevelopment, right? And the reinvigoration of that allows us to think creatively about what the city could be. Because of the fact that we have so much undeveloped land, because our parcels are so large in size, our challenges are well within our means. We have the ability as a community to make an incredible city, one that will shine bright across the United States. And there are people here today that are advocating in the right direction for that. Now, why do I say that? It's because when you look at development in the city of Lubbock and you ask the question, how do we bring revitalization to central Lubbock, to North Lubbock, to East Lubbock? And this is about one Lubbock. It's about shifting the economic center of gravity back to where it needs to be, which is in our downtown. It's about turning back on the economic engine that was, reinvigorating 34th Street using similar concepts that all of y'all have seen as part of the Overland Partners Downtown Revitalization Report for the road diet of Avenue Q. Consider those same concepts as they apply to 34th Street. There are ways that we can do this that are well within our means that mostly require regulatory changes. Impact fees are the beginning of that process. It is the beginning of smart growth. It is saying that there is a better way for us as a community to think about development. We can be intelligent about this. We can be quantitative about this. We can be analytical about this so that we don't drive this city off a fiscal cliff in 15 to 20 years when the unfunded liabilities catch up to us. We have this moment in time to think about this. And for the real estate community, they will still make profit. They will still make profit. Yes, it might be a little bit more difficult. It's more challenging to look at a subdivision that isn't a cotton field to figure out how exactly it is that you can build a home there or how you can build a mixed-income, mixed-use development, but it is possible. Communities across the United States, real estate development communities across the United States have found ways to make profit from that. Sometimes it is public-private partnerships. Sometimes there are incentives on the part of the public ledger to make those things happen, but they are based on smart growth, they are based on analytics, they are based on strategy for how the city and how the community can move forward. Now, as we move forward in this conversation, I ask you to listen to the initiating committee and the founding or the board members of the Lubbock Compact as they advocate to you to keep this conversation going while they collect petition signatures to put in front of you an ordinance. And I ask you that if that ordinance does in fact come in front of you and you have a reluctance that this is not speaking for the voice of the community that you represent, that I please ask you to allow for that petition to continue on as part of the charters process and go to a special ballot initiative to allow for the citizens of Lubbock to vote on this topic. Allow for the democracy of the city of Lubbock to make this decision that is so critical and so important. But understand that impact fees are just a first step, right? They don't cover the cost of infrastructure of those new homes or those new neighborhoods. We just have that 10-year period. It's a one-time fee. Even then, it's 50% of that at maximum. This won't cover it, right? It's just the beginning. It is a step forward to say that there is an inclusive vision of the future of this city, one that can be incredible and one that can embrace all of us together as one Lubbock. And so I ask you, please consider the words of the Lubbock Compact's board and those who are advocating here today to keep this session going, keep the public comments open, until such time as they are able to collect the petition signatures to bring in front of you a smart growth ordinance for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brookfield.
Mayor, members of the council, my name is Paul Stell. I live at 9305 Salisbury Lane. And like my fellow Lubbockite, I had drunk the Kool-Aid before. And many of you know I developed Vintage Township. And the doom and gloom that was just presented, that we're going to run off a cliff in 20 years and not be able to handle our physical responsibilities, is false. And it's an academic approach that has its roots in well-intentioned goals and some wonderful ideas, but it's very complicated. So many things in our life are so very complicated. Race relations are complicated. How we tax our country, federal taxes, is complicated. Life is complicated. And yes, we want to have a built environment that is the best possible environment we can have so that our community, our civilization can prosper. And that's the goal of smart growth. That's the goal of new urbanism. But oftentimes, the academic approach and the idealism of creating some utopia that's just a wonderful place gets lost in the reality of the market. And the gentleman that spoke a minute ago spoke about how taxes, the elasticity of the market, and how the customer is not going to just pay $240 now because they're going to have extra taxes and we just pass it on, is missing the mark about the market. The gentleman said that he's not going to pay $240, or a resident would not pay $240 for a home. That's correct. They won't pay $240 because they can't. They'll only pay the $220 they originally could. What will happen is the customer will get a lower quality product. That's what will happen. They can only afford the $220, and so instead of getting granite countertops, they'll get Formica. Instead of getting 2,000 feet, they'll get 1,750 feet. And the customer loses when costs go up, okay? And so that is exactly what happens. When you go to other markets around the state, and even around the country, we all know from the news, people live in far lower quality housing and affordability than anything we have in Lubbock. Lubbock's affordability allows us to have a much higher quality of life. And the affordability is what drives that. So that tax will go on, and it'll stay $220, but they will get less. And so, secondly, the idea is, well, we're building building badly, and we need to work as a society to put together a comprehensive approach, public-private partnerships. Well, that's very challenging to do. And when you say public-private partnerships, you're really just saying taxpayers come alongside to subsidize a problem. And all that is using more tax dollars and raising taxes on citizens to fix a problem. So the nomenclature of a public-private partnership is thrown out as a solution, but we lose, in fact, what's happening. And that tax is just being thrown on to the local citizen to pay to solve the problem. Now, the idea is, well, let's build smarter. Okay, let's have a smarter approach. I have said to many people, and as a person who drank the Kool-Aid for new urbanism, and I love new urbanism, don't get me wrong, but I drank it just fully. And I went into vintage, I designed vintage, and thought, man, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I thought, I've got the Chili's, kind of restaurant of residential neighborhoods. Nobody's seen anything like this in Lubbock. They're going to love it. You know what? They didn't love all of it. They didn't like the narrow streets. That was a big mistake. The market is what it is, and you can decide what you think it wants, but it doesn't always respond that way. And so the idea of building something better, smart growth or new urbanism, is a great concept, but it is challenging to implement. And in fact, when we talk about mixed use or this missing middle, which is a very important issue in our country, the problem is cost. You cannot build mixed use in Lubbock, Texas, and have the typical resident pay for that. They don't want to pay that much rent. To be mixed use and to get it dense, you're going to have structured parking. Structured parking is going to add $15,000 a space for a car. Residents don't want to pay the extra cost for that. And so I just want to challenge you to take what you hear academically and consider what really happens in the market. Because in the development community, yes, we will make our profits or we won't do it. Well, who suffers is the customer. They don't get near as good a product. And the solution is they will go where they can get the best product, biggest bang they can get for their dollar. You know where they're going to go? They're going to go out in the county. They're going to go to the county because they're going to pay these taxes in the county. And you see that a lot of places in West Texas and a lot of communities. They go out to the county, and the city suffers because they lose some of those taxes. And so this idealism of creating a much better Lubbock, yes, it's true. We want to strive for that. But let's not over-dramatize that this impact fee is the solution to solve all the inequities in our society, because it is not. What we're going to do is we're going to push costs up. The customer's going to get squeezed and get less for their dollar, or they're going to go somewhere else, and the city loses for that. And so I couldn't listen to what I just heard without kind of giving a perspective of someone who's done it and knows what it takes to build these mixed-use environments. It is very important. I agree. We need to build something better quality in our city, and it pains me to see disposable communities we put together that in 2 generations fall apart. But that's a bigger problem than what this impact fee is about. And so I don't want it over-dramatized. Keep costs as low as you can, and Lubbock will prosper. But when you force, through city and government involvement, when you force things like mixed use and whatnot, you go down the path of other cities and other states. We hear that housing is through the roof. Toronto, Canada is a great example. They thought, well, we're going to consolidate land and make it public land and force everything to go up and be more dense. And studies have proven that the cost of home ownership has skyrocketed in that city. And you know who won? The developers made their money. But who got screwed, who got messed around was the residents. They're paying tons of money for little boxes they live in. And so I encourage you to watch cost. You know, we want to pay what needs to be paid for, but let's keep a balanced approach to it. It's complicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stell. Okay, we're gonna pause the public hearing for a 10-minute recess. Council will come back at 7:10. We're in recess.
can get it before you ask. Okay, thank you. Okay, it's 7:15. Lubbock City Council is back in session. We're still in a public hearing. Or any other public comments? Okay, council. At such point that we close the public hearing, we have 30 days to have taken final action on impact fees. I would remind council that we slowed down this process this summer when we saw that we weren't going to be able to get it done prior to budget, generally driven by some COVID-19 kind of slowdowns, and we thought it was more appropriate to give it its due time, and I feel like that's we've been true to our word in that regard. I'm inclined to close the public hearing. We have it's posted tonight to discuss. We have after tonight we have 3 more regularly scheduled meetings within 30 days. We meet next Tuesday night. We meet 2 weeks following that on the 27th, and then we're going to meet on Monday, the 2nd of November. We move our meetings in November to the first and third Tuesdays. Normally, we will meet on the Monday, the 2nd, in lieu of meeting on Election Day, the 3rd. So all those 3 meetings, as well as tonight's meeting, fall within that 30-day window, which would allow us to have both a first reading and a second reading, and to have time for work with citizens and staff if we need to modify, amend, whatever it may be that the motion is. So I know we don't have to have a motion or second to close the hearing. As the chair, I have the right to do that, but I'm open to any input that you might have on that topic. Okay, now you're on. Ms. Patterson-Harris.
Thank you very much. It's been a long, long day for me. In allowing the hearing to stay open, what does that allow for the council to do versus closing the hearing? What does it allow for the council to do?
Good question. We'll start with Mr. Weaver, and then Mr. Atkinson can add anything to that. Mr. Weaver.
Yes, sir. If the public hearing remains open, the council is not permitted to proceed to the next item, which would be considering the ordinance. The ordinance cannot be considered formally until the public hearing is closed and complete.
Any questions on that, Ms. Patterson-Harris?
Once the public hearing is closed. Because we can't proceed any further as long as the public hearing is open. During that process, and I'm trying to remember when we kept the public hearing open in July. I think was it July? My days run together.
June. June or July, yes. I believe that's right, yes.
What further discussions, presentations, or things along those lines are permissible, if at all?
Council, as I said earlier, the council cannot formally take up the ordinance until the public hearing is closed. If you kept it open and you felt like you needed additional information from the staff or another presentation during the pendency of the public hearing, I think you could do that if the council as a whole wanted to convene again or have additional presentation or, of course, hear from the public, because the public hearing would still be open. You could still have that. Robust discussions about what the council wants to do, possible amendments, heavy policy decisions among the council needs to happen after the public hearing is closed.
The reason I ask is because I am in need of some additional information and questions. I visited briefly with Mr. Keenum, but I think I've slept at least a couple days since then and have some additional questions. Whether they can be answered here this evening, I'm not sure. My only concern is that if we close the public hearing, then it's closed and we cannot reopen. Am I correct?
That's correct. Once the public hearing is closed, that is the end of that opportunity to obtain public hearing. So you are correct. It either needs to stay open for additional opportunity or be closed. Once it's closed, it cannot be reopened.
But closing
However-
closing the public hearing would not preclude council from working with staff. It wouldn't preclude council from.
That's correct.
Hearing from citizens that had input on it.
You're talking about just one-on-one meeting?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
What it does, though, is it does start a 30-day,
Yes.
shot clock, so to speak.
It does.
Right?
And if you had any questions now, Ms. Councilwoman Patterson-Harris, you could, if you need, did you say you needed Mr. Keenum again? You had a question for him?
Oh, I would probably ask questions of Mr. Keenum from here till the end of December.
Okay,
but,
I thought I heard you make a reference to him.
In reference to this matter, I do have some questions and some concerns and some requests, I guess, with regard to information, because I'm not totally satisfied.
If I might.
And that's the deal. I don't want us to rush too fast and do something to say, well, God dog it, we can't go back and change that. That's my deal. It's too important. It's too important. It's kind of like race relations, even though they're not complicated. But that's my concern.
And
If I can make one suggestion, up to the will of the council, of course, you could always close the public hearing, move to the next item. Doesn't mean you have to take it up tonight.
Right.
You could postpone the consideration of the item if the council wished to, postpone it to a date certain.
You
It
could
just
even
means
get
you
a mo-
wouldn't
you-
open the public hearing, but you could
That's right.
handle that.
You could get a motion in a second and still postpone to.
Yes.
To have
Yes.
some discussion around
Yes.
it, still postpone to date certain. So,
Correct.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
I just don't want to mess this thing up. It's too important to all the folks here and all of the folks who are not here. It's very important to them. It's a huge decision for the city, and we need, my opinion, is that we need to make sure that we make the best decision that we can and that we get it right. I've always said, if nothing changes, not a darn thing changes. If we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting what we're getting. And I think the consensus is we don't want to keep getting what we're getting. So that's my concern here this evening.
Yeah, well stated. Mr. Atkinson, do you have anything to add to that? To what Mr. Weaver had to say?
I think it's been well covered. The opportunity for the council to discuss and deliberate will require the closing of the hearing. It does not require that you take a formal action tonight. As Mayor mentioned, you still have plenty of meetings within that window.
Ms. Patterson-Harris.
Not plenty of meeting tonight, huh? We don't have plenty of meeting tonight, do we?
I think that depends on how long we discuss tonight.
We ain't got no plenty of meeting tonight. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else on that? Okay, I think just, I do believe we have enough time to get this right in 30 days. So with the input from Mr. Weaver, I think we will go ahead and close the public hearing. We'll move to the second item on our agenda tonight, which is the first reading of an ordinance from engineering It's the impact fee ordinance. Council, it's a very thorough ordinance if you've had a chance to go through it. I think what I'd like to do is to ask Mr. Atkinson to run back through and remind everyone what is included in the ordinances in front of us, okay? This is a starting point, but we need to know what's included. So, Mr. Atkinson, I think we're going to use some slides we used earlier. Is that correct? Okay. The podium input is, you want to do it from, do you have the slides at your, or do you need somebody to do them for you down here?
Come up and let's start back on page 14.
Pardon.
Thank you. And Mike, I think I'll have two more I'll ask you to switch here in just a minute, so appreciate it.
You want me to stand up here or you want me to?
Right there is great. Great.
Okay, so once again, this is a summary, council, of what is included in the proposed ordinance. Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mayor. So the items that I'm going to go over now, these are the operative pieces. These are the decision points that are contained within the ordinance that's in front of you. What we'll cover here is what's in it at the moment, all certainly subject to your discussion and potential change. I'm going to read these just slightly out of order. So I'm going to take the bottom one, the bottom bullet, and we'll read that first. The recommendation within your ordinance is that you set the rate for water and wastewater to 0, and that is across the entirety of the city. Water, wastewater, 0 across the entirety of the city. Set the collection rate, I'm back at the top, for your roadway impact fees in G and in H to 0. The effect of that is there are no impact fees in G and H. No impact fees in G or H. Set the collection rate for single-family residential greater than 2,000 square feet at the maximum rate. Again, no applicability to G and H. Set the collection rate for single-family residential less than or equal to 2,000 square feet with a 25% discount. Does not apply to G and H, they're at 0. Set the collection rate for all other uses. So all uses other than single family, regardless of the size, with a 50% discount. Will not apply to G and H because they are set at 0. Okay, next slide, please. The effective date that is in your draft ordinance is to be 6 months from the date the council adopts it, if you do adopt it. Okay? So when we pick second read, and if it were to pass on second read, the effective date of all of this is 6 months in the future. Require any change in the collection rate, any change in the collection rate. So be it roadway, be it water, be it wastewater. Any change in the collection rate is to go through the public hearing process as defined in Chapter 395 of the Local Government Code. So this is that council calls a hearing. Hearing cannot occur before the passage of 30 days, and et cetera. Also, though, to include a collection rate review by your Capital Improvement Advisory Committee. And Capital Improvement Advisory Committee is to be given a minimum of 60 days to work their way through that. If you go through this process, Capital Improvement Advisory Committee has its 60-day review, you go through your public hearing process, 30-day notice, and you make a change. You are a subsequent body. You make a change, that change, again, would not go into effect for an additional 6 months. Okay? Next, please. No additional roadway fees to be assessed for an existing occupied building that's not being demolished, that has a change of use, and that the total square footage is to be modified by less than 1,000 additional square feet. So it's not saying you can't add something to it, it's saying you can't add a lot to it. And then this last one I think is very, very relevant for our discussion. It's a discussion on affordable housing. Development that will qualify as affordable housing under 42 United States Code Section 12745, as it will be amended. That development that qualifies under that and is participating in an affordable housing development program is exempt from those roadway impact fees, and that is not exclusive to G&H. That is to any. Now, that piece of the federal code is pretty particular. We have some familiarity with it from community development. I'm going to ask Mr. Howerton to come up. He has prepared a summary of what this means, and I think that might help with further discussion. So, Mr. Howerton, Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keenum. Welcome, Mr. Howerton.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. As Jarrett mentioned, 42 U.S.C. Section 12745 defines for the federal government under HUD what affordable housing is. We talk about affordable housing. There's many different thoughts of what that means. The federal government actually defines that for us. This is very detailed, so I'm just going to read through it and answer any questions that you may have from it.
Mr. Howerton, pull that microphone a little closer too, if you would.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
These are separated in two categories. One's for rental units, one's for single-family households. The rental units have 5 separate criteria if the units are pre-existing or already built. There's a 6th one if the construction is new construction. So I'll go through those quickly. Rents cannot be greater than the lesser of 1, the existing fair market rent for comparable units in the area, or rent does not exceed 30% of the adjusted income of a family whose income equals 65% of the median income for the area. Remember that the median income is defined by number of folks in a household. So if you have 2 folks in a household, it's going to be very different than if you have 8.
Right.
It's going to go up. The next criteria is complex has not less than 20% of the units that are occupied by very low-income families who pay no more than 30% of the family's adjusted income monthly. Or the complex is occupied by very low-income families and having rents not higher than the gross rent for rent-restricted residential units. When we talk about low-income, low-mod income, we're talking about 80% of the median income for that household size. When we're talking very low income, we're talking 50% of the median income for that household size. So we'll move to the third. Complex is occupied only by households that qualify as low income families. Number 4, complex does not refuse a tenant that has a voucher or a promise to receive a voucher. Complex will remain affordable for a period of years, and that is set by HUD. It's not tied to the mortgage or the term of the payback. It is actually set by, it's the useful life of the complex, basically, and that is assigned by HUD. If those units are new, they do have to meet the energy efficient standards as set forth by the HUD secretary. We'll now move to home ownership. There are 4 criteria for these. Number 1, has an initial purchase price that does not exceed 95% of the median price for a new household for the area. 95% of the median cost of a household in the area. That amount for Lubbock, the last number I could find was right around $155,000. Second criteria, the home is the principal residence of an owner whose family is of low income status. Third is subject to resale restrictions that are established by the city and determined to be appropriate by the secretary. So if you're within a certain period of time, I'm going to use a home reference because we put $10,000 of home dollars into a housing project. HUD tells me how long those units have to be affordable, and it tells me how long those restrictions will last. It ranges from 5 to 20 years. The last time to check, but I believe the highest amount is 20 years. And finally, also for new construction, it has to meet the energy code that we discussed earlier.
Okay, so that's the last piece you were going to add, right, Mr. Atkins?
That is correct, Mayor. That is the summary of those variables that are listed in that draft ordinance that you have in front of you. These are also the items that are subject to the council's decision and discretion. You can change these.
So back to the affordable piece, my understanding is if a builder went through the process of qualifying either single-family homes or a rental project.
Yes, sir.
To meet the HUD definition of affordable, then there would be no roadway impact fees collected from that project, regardless of where that project was built in the community.
Correct, yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a clawback provision in the draft ordinance if that builder, that developer fails to follow through.
Much like.
But seems like a good alternative.
And this is my understanding, the CIAC did not have to include this, but it was something they chose to include.
That's my understanding as well, yes, sir.
It is an optional item.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Anything from Mr. Howerton? Any further questions for Ms. Patterson? Ms. Patterson-Harris?
Walk me through the process of someone, if we're talking about a single family for purchase. Walk me through the process of an individual qualifying to build such housing. Well, where would that begin? What does that process look like?
That process would start with the planning process with the city and the developer or the builder. Once we have those plans, we would eventually have to go to HUD to make sure that we're meeting their requirements. But that would be done by staff, and we did get that answer for you.
So the city staff would go through, work with HUD to determine?
Yes, ma'am. And you'd pull CD staff in for that process.
So possibly a program that we might have some familiarity with, or some of the first-time homebuyer programs that are funded through HUD. It's that basic process for that buyer.
Repeat that again, I think.
The years that there's been first-time homebuyer assistance through HUD that have affordability requirements, it's the similar process.
You'll remember the down payment and closing cost assistance programs.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howerton.
Yes, sir.
Oh, Bill, hold on. I thought Ms. Joy was done, and she's not.
When it talks about a low-income family.
Yes, ma'am.
What is that amount in Lubbock, Texas?
It varies. When I was doing it years ago for a family of 4, it was $24,000. I know that's gone up. It's probably around $29,000 or $30,000 at this point. It's the requirements are put out annually by HUD, so that they determine those amounts for us, and we follow those restrictions or guidelines.
Okay.
And we can provide the most recent to the council for their review.
Well, the reason I'm asking is the provision for dividing single-family residence into greater than 2,000 square feet and less than 2,000 square feet really doesn't help me, okay? I can see lots of abuse that could occur in that scenario. But I think the most important thing is that many of us are very concerned about affordable housing.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I think it's very helpful to have that provision so that we can provide the affordable housing. As you said, if someone's characterized as a low-income family, let's say family of $4,000 or $24,000, and then the definition that, or the amount that you gave us for the median purchase price for an area. Now, when you talk about area, are you talking about service areas?
Talking about City of Lubbock is the number that I had.
Okay.
It's Lubbock County.
Okay, all right. And I guess the good thing is that those developments could be in any part of the city.
Yes, ma'am.
They're not
Absolutely.
limited to one area.
That's the beauty
Or
of it,
two
yes, ma'am.
areas, but the entire city could be considered for those developments. So that's kind of where I am. I do not wish to divide arbitrarily, and someone used that word earlier. I think the CIAC considered that because it came up in one of our discussions. How do we handle the affordable housing issue? And I do not see that that is helpful to the process. I think it's going to complicate the process. And so given what you have told us concerning the 42 United States Code, Section 12745 is amended, is very helpful in this decision making.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we do not want to ignore those people who cannot afford what some others can afford just based upon their incomes.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I have a question. You indicated that you're using the 65% medium income is what's being utilized? Or did I hear that wrong? Did you said 65% of median income is what is being used to determine?
Income equals 65% of the median income for the area. It's on, under the first criteria under the rent amount. And that's just for the rental property.
That's just for the rental property?
Yes, ma'am.
About what, and you don't have the numbers to show us to
I
say
wish
the
I'd thought to
breakdown?
bring the chart, but I'm 90% sure that the a household of four is just above 31,000. And it goes up. We talked about there's a large variation between the two household and the eight. It takes a lot more house to do, and that's what we've seen going through our CD programs.
And that 60% is what's set aside by HUD. There's no way that we can adjust that?
Yes, ma'am. That's in the statute.
I wish we had the scale so we could take a look at that to see what that equates to, depending upon the house size, the family size.
I'm happy to go around and find it for you.
Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Mayor. More of a statement. Mr. Payne quoted a few people. I'd like to make a quote myself. It says, "History will judge societies and governments and their institutions not by how big they are or how well they serve the rich and the powerful, but how effectively they respond to the needs of the poor and the helpless." And we can't forget, I get calls and I don't know how people are surviving on fixed incomes of $800 or less a month. You know, it's a tough decision that we're faced with, but somehow we've got to come up and be all inclusive as well as much as we can. But, you know, we've got to, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Ms. Joy.
Mr. Howerton, one quick question. This appears, I think, in both the rental and the ownership. If they're constructed, they have to meet the energy efficiency efficiency standards set by HUD.
Yes, ma'am.
What are those?
I don't have those with me right now. I'm happy to share those with you, though.
Is it something that's onerous for a developer or a builder, or do you know?
It could be, yes, it could be. There's
Okay.
the green requirements can be, yes.
Okay, and would you provide that to us as
Yes,
well,
ma'am.
so that
Absolutely.
we have that for the public?
I apologize for not having that.
That's okay.
Council member, if I might maybe add to that a little bit. Bill, when you get those, we actually have, the adopted standard energy code that everything has to be built to
Correct.
today. Let's possibly look and see where the differences are,
compare
because the
those
energy
two.
code's universal across town.
Exactly, yes, sir.
The Census Quick Fact page says that the median household income in Lubbock County is $50,473. That was 2018 dollars.
I was just laughing, Mr. Mayor, as how quickly you responded.
Well, it's right at the tip of your fingertips.
And that doesn't break it down into household size. And what HUD's looking at is 80% of that number for household size.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howerton.
Yes, sir.
Okay, council, so we've gotten a summary on the motion, or excuse, yeah, the item, the ordinance is in front of us. Do you want to, I'll open the floor for a motion to begin consideration on this tonight.
Mr. Mayor?
Ms. Patterson-Harris.
Before we begin, I'd just like to say that I am not prepared to make a decision on this matter on this evening. I would that, as we've done before, allot time for the additional questions, because I have a whole list of them here for Mr. Keenum. He and I are probably going to have a date here coming up.
Sure.
I have a lot of questions. I'm concerned by some of the information that has been presented. As we look at and kind of address square footage, I can't tell you a place in District 2 by large numbers where properties, residential housing, is 2,000 square feet. So those are things that I'd like to discuss, maybe shifting or adjusting that, because I don't, and I've kind of walked around. I spent a lot of time in the district, and that's not and I don't want us to put ourselves in, and there may be some places that we implement some of the affordable housing stuff forward. I don't know, but I know that within District 2, and Mr. Chattis may have some similar comments, that type of square footage is not. I think that there's maybe a division that we may need to do. I don't know, but I'd like to have further conversation.
So let me just a couple thoughts. One is that we generally get a motion in a second before we have substantive discussion. Now, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't postpone any action, even a first consideration, until a date certain. We don't have to do it that way. That's just normally our practice. I would open it to you guys as to how you want to do that. I do think that it's important for us to start narrowing this down. If there are things that we don't like in the ordinance or would like to be considered, I think it's important that we give staff input on that. So with that being said, I'll yield the floor. Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mayor. I still have a couple of questions of staff. One is, we had, at the last meeting, we had discussion on being able to look and see if you did, let's just use single family. There's been some folks that said recommend single family at 50% discount. What would that do to your total?
I think your quick answer there is you take your maximum of 15.3 for your roadway, and the CIAC recommended right now is 9.3 million, which is more than half. So if you just cut everything in half, that's going to be 7.65 million. So it would reduce the amount that we would collect by another 1.6 million or so, trying to do math on the fly. But I mean, that's kind of the quick way of, that's not broken out by service area, that's citywide. And so we would have to do a little more diving into to get you answers for that.
And also any of these are going to make assumptions on the way we grow.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Commercial growth, industrial growth, multifamily growth, as well as single family, which we spent most of our time on talking about tonight.
Yes, sir, that'd be correct. And we've looked at from 2019 to year-to-date 2020, and some of those, and we've got some of those by service area of how much we would have collected based on the current CIAC recommendations that we can provide. But again, it's a work in progress and try to project out into the future based on growth and lots of assumptions that are made on all of that.
Mr. Griffith?
Thank you, Mike. Ms. Joy made a comment that alluded to when we talk about affordability, which has been a big concern. And obviously the recommendation from CIAC that I've had some discussion on, and that's the 2,000 foot. And the more I've thought through this, I do not recommend that. I really don't. I've heard from a lot of folks tonight, and I appreciate everybody's participation. Very, very good dialogue and a lot of heartfelt words from a lot of people. We appreciate that. But I do think as this is being discussed on the affordability component, as Mr. Howerton brought the new data forward, I feel a lot better about allowing that mechanism to go forward. I see that as very beneficial to this city as we go forward. And that could, again, it can be done anywhere in the city, which is really neat. Thank you.
Let's go to Ms. Joy and then to Mr. Childis.
Just along the lines of discussion, we have people here tonight. They've taken lots of time out of their evenings, and I think they're entitled to hear some discussion from the council. And so whatever we have to do in order to have that discussion, I think we need to do, knowing full well that we can always postpone a decision on the ordinance, but I think they're entitled to hear from some of us and some of our questions and then some of our comments.
Certainly, that's been our practice. The floor is open for a motion. Mr. Griffith?
Oh, I think Mr. Chavez was before.
Oh, Mr. Chavez.
Mr. Keenum. You didn't get away fast enough.
So close.
Or maybe Mr. Payne, I'm not quite sure. 2,000 square feet, how was that arrived? How did that number come up instead of 1,500 or 2,500? Why 2,000?
I'll take a stab, and then if I botch it, I'll let Mr. Payne come up. But they were looking at the affordability of housing and looking at building permits and what had come in the last year or so, the square footage of homes, of where's the break point? And, you know, is it arbitrary? Not entirely. To say, you know, 1,800 square foot was kind of what a lot of builders had reported to Mr. Payne of, that's kind of the break point of having extra money to be able to afford more of a house. And so the 200 extra square feet gave them a little bit of a buffer in that regard of a smaller home, maybe more affordable for a lot of the population. And so I think that was kind of how pseudo-scientific. They tried to come up with that number to try to address the idea of affordability of housing, not the affordable housing like we've talked about, the different provision entirely.
Yeah, because the affordability, I'm with Ms. Patterson Harris over there. In my district, 2,000 square foot, if you take both country clubs out of the picture, I don't think that's indicative of what's in my district.
And so the recommendation that's before you from the committee would be that anything less than 2,000 square foot would have that 25% discount. And I know you've heard from some of the other members to say, or the citizens to say 50% discount across the board for single-family residential. So, you know, that's a scenario that's open for discussion one way or the other.
I would never be in favor of 50% across the board. Financially, in my district, it would be a harsh impact on a lot of the majority of the people in my district. I may be shooting myself in the foot there, but quite a few people, the calls that I receive from people that are on fixed incomes, they're surviving on less than $1,000 a month.
And this fee would not go to anybody that currently has a home. This would just be a purchase of a brand-new home.
Yeah, they would be exempt, I understand.
Yes.
Just point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Joy.
Define affordable housing for me.
That's
Me
what Mr.
define
Howerton
affordable?
just defined.
I think affordable housing would be the national statute by the United States Code, and that and Mr. Howerton is the one that, there's a very strict definition of affordable housing.
And it really doesn't matter what that definition is, because if you don't have any credit ability, it doesn't matter, does it?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Or you may have some credit ability, you just don't have it for over a 2,000 square foot home. I have a question, if I may, unless you want to go and let Mr. Griffith do his thing. With regard to water and wastewater, let's go to the base rate. Let me move a little bit. With regard to the base rate that every citizen in the city pays.
Well, it's every ratepayer, so not
Yes,
everybody
every
that's a
ratepayer.
citizen pays
Yeah,
water.
every ratepayer, sorry.
Yes,
What determines that actual rate?
The base
And
rate
what,
cost?
and what are those fees used for? What determines the rate, and what are those fees actually used for?
I'll start on that. It's a great.
I could take a stab.
It's a great question. Okay. All of the rates that are set in Lubbock start with a rate model that we have that's done by a third party. It's New Gen Strategies. It is extremely detailed and complex. It brings forward to staff a recommendation. We look at it, try to do whatever adjustments we have, and then we ultimately bring it to the council. And if you'll think back, we've not done a rate increase on water in 2 years, but the year prior to that, staff brought one in. We asked for a base rate increase. Council gave us great feedback during our workshops, and we ultimately did do a base rate increase, but we also included the first volume of water within that base rate. The theory behind the base rate is that it should, as close as possible, it should cover that fixed cost of the system. And what that means is we may pump 55 million gallons of water a day during the summer, and we may pump 30 during the winter. But there's a cost of that system regardless how much water got pumped. The base rate, as close as possible, should cover that. If you talk to a rating agency or a financial modeler, they'll tell you it should cover it 100%. That's something to strive for. It rarely ever happens. But that base rate makes that system possible. It makes it function, and it allows the system in the summer to pump a lot of water and to pump less during the winter. But if I could throw one more comment into that, since we're talking about water rates. We've had some excellent comments tonight. We've had them at several other hearings about the fact that water and wastewater are enterprise funds, and they are. And enterprise funds are designed to stand on their own. If they require X dollars to function, We have to set rates that give us X dollars, and we do. Well, we've done a great job of that, and very, very proud of y'all's work in that aspect. One thing that's not been mentioned, though, in those discussions, when we bring you the budgets each summer and we bring you the capital plans and we talk about this year we didn't do a rate increase, remember I said flat out, I don't think we can do that a third year in a row. Those rate models all include rate increases. So to continue to maintain the balance in those enterprise funds, you will, maybe not each year, but you will be faced with rate increases to continue to do that. The fixed cost of those systems does not stay the same. The relative consumption of water pretty much does. When the fixed cost goes up, the price has to go up. Otherwise, you no longer have an enterprise system.
And what causes the need for them? What causes the need for them to go up? Is that the addition to the system?
It certainly can be, but things that begin simply with the cost of energy. And we've been real fortunate. The energy cost for us has been relatively low. I mean, it really has for a couple of years. But the cost of energy, the cost of chemicals, the cost of the personnel that it takes. Growth has an impact, sure. Growth will generate the same amount of revenue that the existing is using, so it's not necessarily out of proportion. And then capital. You have a system that in some cases it's as new as yesterday, and in some cases it's 80 years old. So you have capital cost.
So what would be the reason for the impact fees in water and wastewater?
So impact fees, again, can only be used for new capital improvements. And so that new infrastructure that would be built, impact fee for water and sewer would not pay for maintenance. And so as Mr. Atkinson said, that base rate, that includes maintenance costs. Impact fees cannot be used for maintenance costs. But to continue to build infrastructure to support new developments, the money has to come from somewhere. So whether it's a rate increase, if you've got debt falling off and it replaces and you don't have to change the rates, or impact fees gives you another option to provide additional revenue sources that you don't have today to maybe offset increases in rates.
That was going to be my next question. So could the implementation of impact fees for water and wastewater reduce fees that all citizens within the city could be paying?
That would be a decision up to this body,
Could
but
it?
that's an option.
Given
yes, ma'am.
that, given that.
So, just seeing this slide that the water at maximum would be $2 million a year projected. And, $1 in the base rate increase is roughly 1.3 million or so. And so just understanding the $1 rate increase to all the ratepayers in the city, or, charging a sector of the new growth to generate similar revenue.
It would be unlikely to reduce your water rates. It may have, it may have an impact on the future increase.
Future increase.
But without reducing the existing cost, you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to reduce existing rates, and these cannot be used for that.
No, I understand that the impact fees cannot. I was just curious as to the implementation of the collection of them. If they would retard the increase or somehow change the rates that citizens in the entire city pay. Is that a yes or?
Yes, ma'am. That's, okay. I mean, if you've got additional revenue source coming in, that may offset the necessity to increase the rates in the future, like Mr. Atkinson said.
Mr. Griffith.
Mr. Mayor, first of all, I want to thank everyone that showed up in the audience tonight to provide some information to us in regards to this issue. It was very good, regardless of what point of view you brought to the podium. For myself, I would like to hope that at the stroke of midnight on December 31st and we enter 2021, it'll be more like 2019 than it was 2020. With that said, whatever action we take tonight, I have a lot more what-ifs tonight than I did before we started this meeting tonight. Even with the discussion we've had with water, wastewater, and affordable housing. Ms. Joy, that is an interesting term. What's affordable housing to me may be different than what it is to Mr. Keenum based upon what kind of house we would like to have and what kind of house we can afford. So, Mr. Mayor, whatever we do tonight, I definitely, I personally have a lot more what-ifs, and even some questions of if we did this, what would happen to that, and so on and so forth, because I think that this is such an important issue as we move forward. And I do agree that one of the best selling points we have as a city is whatever affordable housing means to you and whatever affordable housing means to the person next to you. It's what makes us so attractive to people to potentially look at moving here. So with that said, Mr. Mayor, whatever we do, I have many more what-ifs than I did before we started this evening. Thank you very much.
Duly noted. Thank you, Mr. Christian. Mr. Griffith?
Thank you, Mayor. We have had good discussion. I understand there are still more questions. But I do think it's time to move forward. So I move to approve with the CIAC recommendations this ordinance with the following change: to amend section 41.02.003C of the ordinance concerning roadway impact fees to reduce roadway impact fees for all single-family detached housing in all service units to 50% of the maximum fee. I believe this, is the right way to handle roadway.
Does that include the 2,000 square feet?
This would be all single-family detached housing in all service units to 50% of the maximum fee.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor now. It's amended motion. We got a second. We'll continue discussion. We can start. Mr. Griffith, why don't you, if you'd like to spend any more time building your case for that, why don't we start with that?
Thank you, Mayor. To the point of, and we've had a lot of discussion about the 2,000 feet and affordable housing. And I think from what I'm hearing and all evening hearing, and as I've thought through this, the 2,000 feet, to me, that's a bad number. And so I think we're picking winners and losers. And I think it's wise to start everybody even. And thus, at 50%, this is the same as what multifamily recommendation is and the same as commercial is. So we're not picking winners and losers. And that's my recommendation. That's what I think is the most, gives people, whether you're doing a small home or a big home, let's keep it as economically viable as possible for our entire community.
Mr. Massengill.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for making the motion, Mr. Griffith. I do believe it's time to move forward and make a decision on this. I also appreciate the point that Mr. Griffith brought up about the 2,000 square foot dwelling. I think that's best left out, although probably should have prefaced my comments on that I'm so grateful for all the work and the recommendation that the CIAC committee has made. I want to talk a little bit about the run-up to a potential change in water and wastewater. I guess as we work on this, and not necessarily today, but this would be something that to consider at the next reading, but you could change that 6-month delay to something else. Is that correct? That's a question for Mr. Atkinson, I guess.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chattis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just clarification. The motion,
Yes, sir.
every new household will be at 50%? Did I understand that correctly?
Impact fee.
Yeah, the impact fee, of course. Okay, just clarification. Thank you.
Ms. Joy.
Well, first of all, Mr. Payne, thank you and your committee. That's a very talented group of people. You didn't give their credentials, but had you, I think everyone would have been certainly impressed. I think what's the most encouraging to me is the fact that we can even talk about impact fees. There was a time that there was a taboo. The mention of the word would send people almost into hysterics. And I have to commend the developer and the building community because you came to the table. You didn't start out there, but you came to the table and you recognized that we have to have additional funding for infrastructure. You know, what we've been doing in the past, if we had to build a street by the city, one of two things happened. One, it got paid from the general fund. If we didn't have the money to pay it, we borrowed money to do so. Or in some cases, we actually had some developers who stepped up and helped us. But that really wasn't equitable to those developers because they were doing for their development something that was in addition, whereas some developers would just say no. And so I think it's very important for us to recognize the contribution that developers and builders make to this community. But at the same time, we have to take into account what other people feel about impact fees and how and where they should be imposed. Early on, when we started changing stormwater fees and rates, what we found was that residential was carrying commercial. And the reason for that was because in a typical home, you had a 1-inch meter and you got charged for it. But what we found was some of very, very large businesses only had 1 meter. And they might cover lots of territory. And so they were not paying in accordance or in comparison to what the residentials were paying. And so when we redid those, that was one of the considerations. Let's make this more equitable between residential and commercial. Was it popular? No, it was not. We had some long meetings about that. But as it's turned out, it has worked. You just have to give it time. The 50% recommendation in the motion, I look at that because I do think we have to listen to the fact that COVID is here. And it is not going away tomorrow and probably not next year. And so we don't really know what the future is going to bring. Will the interest rates stay at these low rates they are now, or will they go up? Will people's businesses be able to survive through the next 6 months to a year. And so I think we're better off at the 50% across the board for residential and for commercial and for the apartments. And let's see what it looks like in 6 months. I am a firm believer that we will not, at least as long as I'm sitting here, we will not rush to judgment on that. We're going to take our time just like we have this time. As to water and wastewater, I think the 0 is fine. That's another one that if you read the ordinance carefully, there is no rush on that one either, if that should become necessary. You know, my largest concern initially was about the water from the Canadian River. But I don't think we're within that 10-year period of having to construct a new line. So I think where we are right now at 0, and it will be watched closely, and I think that's where it needs to stay. The process is within the ordinance, and I see no reason to have to go back and start from square one on that. So I thank everybody for doing what they've done. I understand that some of you have some additional questions. I think we need to have this discussion tonight. I understand that we can postpone the vote if necessary. But I think that for now, I have to agree with the motion as presented by Mr. Griffith.
Mr. Christian.
I just want to also say that I agree with the amendment that Mr. Griffin has proposed. I think also in response to Ms. Joy's comment about COVID, kind of goes back to my what-ifs and if what happens, what may or may not happen in 2021. We need to move very slowly so that we make sure that we don't have a very big stumble into the next year. And as far as our friends from the Compact Lubbock folks, I just want to let y'all know that we do hear your voice. I think that there's a consensus. I would like to think that there's consensus as in regards to my fellow council members and the mayor but we want to see that part of Lubbock thrive and prosper and grow. And in my opinion, the number one way to get there is the fact that we did approve the position of the neighborhood development person so that we can start working with y'all to work with a plan and exactly how we can do what we need to do in North and East Lubbock. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Ms. Patterson-Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not there. I'm not there, and this is nothing that is no secret for me, that it bothers me when I look at the two recommendations and what the difference is, and that for year after year after year, when the city was using funds to make up and take care of other roadways and things of that nature in other parts of the city, that certain districts were still left with roadways and are still left with roadways that the funding is not there to make sure that they're maintained or redone when they needed to. And that's my concern, and that's what I see when I see the difference in the amount of funding that could be potentially collected in order to take care of those things. There are tons of streets and tons of streets and tons of streets that were on that list to show that the amount of life in them were well gone. And something like this has been the thing that has disallowed us from being able to improve those roadways. Am I correct?
So say that again. I'm not sure I followed your question.
Not having the funds to replace some of the streets in some areas that needed to be replaced was because of the lack of funding. Am I correct? And so when I look at something like this, and there is such a difference in what can be collected to take care of of roadways, and we're not even talking about the water and wastewater. It bothers me because yet again, with this happening, streets within District 2 will still go without being replaced and repaired.
So I guess when you make that point, what you're saying is because there's not enough dollars to do new streets, some dollars that could have been used for maintenance are being used for, is that what you're saying?
Some dollars that could have been used for replacing streets.
Okay, because we can't use impact fees for that.
I know. What I'm saying, the
sort of
funds that the city
displacement of those-
has.
Okay, all right.
Exactly. And so that's my deal. And because I sit here and maybe there's a happy medium somewhere in there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But as I look at it here, for me, this is not it. And I have to sit here and I have to stand for the citizens that I represent who drive these streets, Avenue A being one, that are in desperate repair, and we don't have the funding to do those things. And that bothers me. So today, as it's presented, I'm not okay with it. If there's a happier place somewhere in there, I don't know. But today, for me, this is not it. It's not it. That's all I got.
Other comments, other things about this proposed ordinance that you would like to see potentially addressed, changed? Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Mr. Massengale brings up a very good point about implementation of water, wastewater, because we have such an excellent mechanism for funding of water and wastewater. As Ms. Joy pointed out, the need for the pipeline north replacement project is probably a decade away. So, but I do think that I think that's a good discussion point as far as when would you have a moratorium on any changes to water and wastewater?
Yeah, you could
taking
put
it off zero.
You know, at some point, we're going to need it. I feel certain about that it's imminent. At some point in our community, some point in time in the future, our community is going to need those dollars for infrastructure. But, you know, as people plan their developments, you could put a little more runway in that, and we could have that discussion. Was the reason I brought that up, and I'm willing to work on that between now and the next reading.
Thank you.
I think that's a good idea. I like the, Mr. Griffith, I like the idea of bringing all single-family housing in line. I need to look at some numbers. I need to understand this better. I mean, when I look at the difference between a 25% discount and a 50% discount, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that that's that significant. I want to understand that. I mean, in Area B, for instance, that's about $486, about $2.75 on a 30-year mortgage at a pretty high-end rate of where the rates are today. By the way, I don't think the mortgage rates are going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, if you listen to what Chairman Powell had to say today about, interest rates aren't going anywhere. Mortgage rates will bounce around some, but I don't think that's problematic. In fact, I had lunch with leadership of our realtors today. We had a fascinating discussion, and one of the things I took away from that is their biggest challenge today is product. There's not enough product for them to sell. And so
we find ourselves in a good spot. I would like to see some scenarios. I'd like to look at what 75% looks like. So and instead of a 50% cut, a 25% cut, what that looks like. I'd like to look at maybe taking that commercial discount from, not multifamily. I can live with multifamily where it is. There's not that many of those projects, but I'd like to see that and this is goes a little bit to your comment about stormwater, because you nailed it on that. I'd like to see maybe that discount, instead of being 50%, being 40%. When you really look at the way those, the way this process works and dig into it, and those projects have a lot more impact. They're going to consume a lot more of those dollars long term. I'd like to look at that. It's difficult to model that without Mr. Whitaker's, all the scenarios, all the assumptions that you've made, but I know it's something we can do. And I think would be worth doing. I think about this for councils in the future. And every reduction we make off of that max fee commits the council to funding that. It means we all pay that extra amount, every one of us. So if we, instead of having a 50% discount, or instead of a 25% discount, we have a 50%. That 25%, within 10 years, we've all got to find a way to fund, because we make a 10-year commitment when we accept impact fees that we'll get that project done. So I think we need to look at that. I think that's would be prudent for us to look at that going forward. I'm okay with setting some time frame on, like you guys have suggested, around water and wastewater. I heard what Mr. Zwiker said loud and clear. However, I do believe the way the rate model is set up and the way we do our capital planning, I think for a period of time, we find ourselves in a good spot, and it's not necessary for us to add that. I've spent a lot of time looking at how eliminating impact fees in our more mature neighborhoods would really, what impact that would have. And I'm having a difficult time finding that there's much impact to that. It sounds good, but in most all of our mature neighborhoods, our thoroughfares are built, our water and wastewater infrastructure is built. I'm not talking about the city streets, but that's not really what the neighborhood streets. That's not what this discussion is about. And so that's where I am as we sit here right now. I need more data to make I think a good decision. But I generally find the track we're on to be acceptable, and I'm glad that there's questions. I'm glad Ms. Passion-Harris has a number of questions. I know it'll be important that we get to those. Mr. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted clarification on what Mr. Masgill was talking about what kind of information you might bring us back in regards to water, wastewater, and what that would do as far as, you suggest banking funds for when we do have to look down the road for that Canadian River pipeline replacement. Is that kind of what you're saying, to give us some models on what might the impact of water, wastewater fees on that?
I'm just suggesting that we give the developers a little more runway on at what point in time that the recommendation is brought to the CIAC to begin water and wastewater impact fees, to give them a little more runway to plan than 60 days plus 6 months.
So you're just talking about delay of whatever might happen?
That's correct.
More than just the 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The other way you could go at that would be just an upfront maybe a moratorium and say you wouldn't even consider it for a certain period of time. I mean, that's another way you could go about it, because you know, you don't know when you might. It's my only concern about something that you would halt implementation for 2 years is, although I guess any ordinance could be changed, frankly, but you know, there's more than one way of getting at that, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Other comments? Okay, so Mr. Atkinson, let's talk a little bit about process, okay? We've got an amendment already, an amended motion that's on the floor. We've had some other comments that might lead to further amendments. Staff should have sufficient time in the next week to work. Let's just say we were to pass a motion to postpone to date certain next Tuesday. We would just keep the motion we have on the floor. We would give staff plenty of time, though, to work with council in helping start to answer questions that they have prior to what would become a first reading, or continued discussion on the first reading.
Yes, sort of.
Would that be, don't you think?
That would work, and Mayor, if you don't mind, let me kind of
please
work through a list here. And some of these can happen very, very quickly, but we're going to provide the summary that Mr. Howerton used to discuss the affordable housing, the 42 USC, as well as the most current AMFI charts, average median family income charts, to the council, because that is where you see the impact of the number of individuals in the home. So the 2, 3, 4, 5 members. We'll get that to you very quickly. We're going to get some information that talks about the energy code that is referenced as it relates to the affordable housing statutes, as well as the energy code that we're currently on here that governs the other buildings. We're going to work on some scenarios we can simply and easily model changing any of these individual percentages of discount, but I think what we're being asked to do is show you what the impact on the whole is when we do that. So we will have that. Myself, Ms. McCacker, Mr. Keenum, whichever of the staff can help. We're certainly willing to sit down. Probably ought to start making some appointments and talking through that. And with that, yes, I think we can, a date certain to the 13th would allow that to get moving.
Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Mayor. There's so many questions, Mayor. I'd like to amend the motion.
Okay, you're offering an amendment to the amended motion.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay.
To a date certain.
Okay, you want to postpone?
Postpone, yes,
Consideration.
postpone
Okay.
for consideration.
And to 13th, is that okay? Next Tuesday?
17th?
13th, that we have our regular scheduled meeting is next Tuesday.
No. The 17th of November? That gives us less than 30 days? No, it doesn't. No, okay. Yeah, let's do it for the next meeting.
Okay. So that's a motion to postpone to date certain, which would be our next scheduled meeting, which is Tuesday, the 13th of October. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Can I have discussion on that? All those in favor of that motion, please say aye. I'm sorry, Ms. Passioners. Yes, ma'am.
Did you call for discussion?
You cannot have.
Okay.
You cannot have you can't have discussion on that, on a motion to postpone indefinitely.
Date certain.
To date certain, excuse me. Yeah.
Only to the propriety of postponement,
Right,
not the variance.
right. And the propriety, it is certainly acceptable to postpone. That part's acceptable. So it's a question about the and we can't discuss the merits, yeah. All those in favor of postponing discussion of this motion to Tuesday, our next meeting, Tuesday, October 13th, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 6-1. Okay, so that, I think that takes care of our business for this evening. We will resume our discussions on this item next week. I appreciate all of you that, thank you for being here tonight. It is, it's 8:35. It's a great day in Lubbock, Texas, and I think this meeting is adjourned.